He replaced his wife at their own anniversary gala, in a ballroom filled with diamonds, cameras, and 300 powerful guests. Adrian Cole publicly erased the woman who built his empire beside him. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She stood there in the dress she chose for their anniversary, while her husband introduced another woman as his future. Then she vanished with one suitcase and a broken soul. But 3 years later, she returned, no longer heartbroken, no longer helpless, with a man so dangerous that one phone call from him could bury Adrian's entire world before dessert was served.
Heels. He put another woman in her place on their anniversary, and 3 years down the road, she returned with a man who could erase his entire world with a single phone call. Let's set the scene. Heels. A ballroom shimmering with 300 of the city's wealthiest souls, champagne, diamonds, and a husband at the microphone, holding the hand of another woman while his own wife is standing 20 feet away in a dress she chose just for him. He smiles. Feels. Her name leaves his lips like an afterthought, and then he announces to everyone that he's trading up. She didn't make a sound, no tears. She just walked out of that life with a single suitcase and simply ceased to exist. 3 years later, Feels, she walked back in. You'll want to stay with me because what this woman does to the man who broke her and the dangerous new husband who stands behind her will leave you breathless. Feels. Go ahead and hit that like button if you believe in payback. And drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this echo travels tonight. Let's begin. The Hale Cole estate was perched on the highest peak of Briarcliff, Feels, a monstrous house of white stone that stared down at the harbor as if criticizing the water for its imperfections. On the evening of the gala, every window was a blaze of gold. The service drive was a parade of catering vans. In the rose garden, Feels, a string quartet was coaxing their instruments into harmony. And somewhere on the second floor, a woman stood before a mirror, trying to recall the simple act of breathing. Her name was Vivian Hale. She was 34 years old, Feels, and she had invested the last 11 of them in a marriage to Adrian Cole. Feels. She had helped him build his empire from nothing, back when it was just a rented space over a dry cleaners in Queensgate. She was the one who kept vigil in hospital waiting rooms with his mother, Feels. She taught herself to smile at people she couldn't stand because Adrian needed their approval. And tonight, on the anniversary of the day they'd scribbled their names on a marriage license with two strangers as witnesses, Feels, she was supposed to stand next to him before the whole eastern seaboard and let him bask in the story of their success. That was the script. She smoothed the silk of her dress, a pale champagne color understated. Adrian preferred her in simple things, Feels. He'd say it was elegance that it made the other wives look desperate. She'd given up fighting him on clothes somewhere around year 6. You look like $1 million, Mrs. Cole. Marisol was on her knees, making a final adjustment to the hem. Feels. Marisol had served the Coles for 9 years. She was the only soul in that entire house Vivian truly trusted. I look exhausted, Vivian replied. You look exhausted and like $1 million, Marisol corrected, getting to her feet and dusting off her knees. Feels. Are you going to get something to eat before you descend into that chaos? You never touched your lunch. I'll eat at the party. No, you won't. I will, Mari. Marisol fixed her with that look, the one with the single arched eyebrow that silently said, Feels. I've known you far too long to fall for that. She moved to the dresser, returned with a granola bar, and firmly pushed it into Vivian's hand. 2 bites, she commanded. Before you even think about those stairs. 2 bites, or I'm calling your mother. Feels. My mother is vacationing in Fort Lauderdale. I have her number. Vivian actually laughed. It was the last genuine laugh that would pass her lips for a very, very long time. Of course, she didn't know that yet. She took the 2 bites. Feels. She gave Marisol a hug, smelling the familiar comfort of lavender soap and starch, and then she walked out of her bedroom and down the long hall toward the grand staircase. Adrian was already downstairs. She could hear his voice. It always carried. Feels. It was one of the first things she fell in love with, back when he was just a 23-year-old boy with a terrible haircut and a dream sketched on a cocktail napkin. You could hear Adrian Cole from the other side of a ballroom. Feels. You could hear him from across a parking garage. You could, she now sometimes thought, hear him from the other side of a marriage. Feels. And what I'm explaining to you, Miller, is that the balance sheet doesn't give a damn about your feelings. She rounded the corner of the landing, and he stopped talking, his head tilting up to look at her from the foot of the stairs. For just a heartbeat, feels. A fraction of a second, she thought she saw the old look, the way he used to see her, like she was the answer to a question he didn't know he was asking. And then it was gone. The flicker vanished, and the smile he used for his clients settled on his face. Feels. There she announced, the woman of the hour, the woman of 1 hour at least. She glided down the final steps. You're early. I'm on time. You're late. I'm his wife. I'm permitted a grand entrance, Miller. Feels, who stood beside Adrian in a tuxedo that hung on him like a cheap suit bag, managed a short, awkward chuckle. Feels. Adrian didn't. Adrian glanced at his watch. The guests begin arriving at 7, he stated. It's 6:51, which gives me 9 minutes. Viv. Adrian. He pushed a breath out through his nose. Feels. It was a sound she had learned to interpret the way some people know the bark of their own dog. It was the sound of tolerance. It was the sound of do not create a scene. It was the sound of make yourself smaller. Feels. She reached the bottom step and placed a kiss on his cheek, because that's what the woman of the hour was supposed to do. He smelled of the cologne she'd given him for his birthday. But there was something else underneath it. Feels. Something sharper she couldn't place. You smell different, she murmured. New shampoo. Viv, please, not tonight. Feels. I didn't say a thing. You said, She held his gaze. She just looked at him for a long moment, long enough for Miller, the human suit bag, to suddenly find a pressing need to inspect the bar. Adrian, she began. Is there something wrong? Feels. Everything is perfectly fine. You've been. Everything is fine, Vivian. Can we just get through tonight? That is all I am asking. Get through tonight. She almost asked him what he meant by that. Get through tonight, Feels. As if the evening were a medical procedure. As if it were a hurricane you had to board up the windows for. But the doorbell chimed. The first guest was on the threshold. The butler was swinging the door wide, and Adrian was turning on his 1,000-watt charm. Feels, arms outstretched, voice booming. Feels. Senator, so the lovely Mrs. Hargrove? And just like that, the moment evaporated. The gala was exquisite. Everyone said so. All evening, Feels, in that specific way wealthy people have of admiring each other's possessions as if it's a reflection of their own good taste. The flowers, Vivian, just divine. The string quartet, where on earth did you find them? And the food, my God, the food. Feels. She smiled. She absorbed the praise. She linked her arm through Adrian's whenever the photographer appeared and angled her chin just so. Exactly as the public relations coach had taught her back in 2018. Flash. Flash. Gorgeous. Feels. Mrs. Cole, just one more. She nursed a single glass of champagne before switching to water. She'd learned long ago that champagne at these events was a snare. Feels. The women who drank too much became loose, and the women who became loose became gossip on Monday morning. Just after 9, she slipped away towards the powder room in the east hallway. She just needed a minute. Her feet ached. Feels. Her face ached from the performance of smiling. All she wanted was to sit on a closed toilet seat, bury her head in her hands for 60 seconds, and then walk back out there. And that's when she heard them. Feels. The powder room shared a common wall with Adrian's private study. A detail she had forgotten. She'd been in that small room 1,000 times and never considered it. But tonight, muffled through the plaster, she heard Adrian's voice. Feels. Hushed to a near whisper. And then she heard the voice of a woman she did not recognize reply to him. Feels. I told you I would handle it. You keep saying that, Adrian. Tonight. I promise you. I'll do it tonight. Your promise. Camille. Don't you Camille me. You've been promising tonight for the last 6 months. Things are different now. Feels. The new contracts are signed. Her name is off everything now. She can't. Legally, she can't. I don't care about the legalities. Well, I do. I built that company. We built that company. You and I, from the lake house, have you forgotten? Silence. Feels. On the other side of that wall, Vivian stood with her hand clamped over her mouth, forgetting to breathe. I haven't forgotten, Adrian said at last, his voice so soft that if she hadn't been pressed right against the wall, she would have missed it entirely. Feels. I haven't forgotten a thing, baby. Baby. A long, long time ago he had called her that. Not anymore. Now it was Viv, or Honey when they had an audience, and on the truly awful nights, it was Vivian. Feels. Each syllable enunciated with the weary patience of a parent speaking to a difficult child. She pushed herself away from the wall. Her legs felt alien, as if they belonged to someone else. Through the wall, she heard the sound of a kiss. Feels. It was the quietest noise in the world. A single, soft, wet sound. A woman's sharp intake of breath and a man's low chuckle. Vivian had no memory of leaving the powder room. She only remembered being back in the hallway, heels, standing under the massive chandelier as a waiter offered her a tray of miniature crab cakes, and hearing herself say, "No thank you," in a voice that sounded chillingly normal. Heels. She remembered re-entering the ballroom. She remembered catching her reflection in a tall, gold-framed mirror near the entrance and thinking, that woman's hair is falling down, before the crushing realization that the woman was her. She fixed her hair, heels. She went to the bar. She asked for a glass of champagne she had no intention of drinking. She just needed something to hold on to, a way to occupy her hands. The contracts are signed. Her name is off everything now, the company. Cole Hale Holdings, heels. Her name wasn't on anything. When did that happen? She began to claw through her memory of the last 6 months, the stacks of papers he'd asked her to sign at home, heels. All those meetings, the ones where he'd slide a stack of papers across the desk and say, "Just sign this, babe. It's a restructuring thing." And she had. She'd signed dozens of them. She trusted him, because that's what you do with the person you marry, heels. And because her own lawyer had retired, Adrian had smiled that easy smile of his. "Use mine, he's great, he'll take care of you." And mostly? She signed because she was just so tired, but her knees didn't give out. Later she would be proud of that, heels. Her knees did not buckle, Vivian. She turned. There was Adrian walking toward her across the ballroom, and he wasn't by himself. He was with a woman, young. Not much younger than Vivian, heels, maybe 29 or 30, in a blood-red dress slid all the way up her thigh. Hair pinned up in a dark cascade. Heels. She had one of those faces that made the rest of it pointless. The makeup, the dress, the elaborate hair, none of it mattered when a person was born with a face that could make waiters drop their trays. Camille. "Viv, I want you to meet somebody," heels. Vivian knew exactly what was coming. You know it the way you know a car is about to hit you the second it hops the curb. There was nothing she could do to stop it. She couldn't even move. "This is Camille Devereaux," heels. She's been doing some consulting for us. For me." His hand rested on the small of Camille's back. Vivian's eyes locked onto it. His hand on the back of another woman, and the almost imperceptible way Camille leaned into his touch. Heels. Like a flower turning its head toward the only sun in the sky. Heels. "It's lovely to meet you," Camille said, her voice a warm melody. Her eyes, though, were cold as stone. "Likewise," Vivian managed. "I've heard so much about you." "Have you now?" "Viv." Adrian's smile was stretched thin. "Don't. I'm just being polite, Adrian." Heels. I said, "Have you?" I think that's a perfectly polite thing to say. A tiny knowing curl appeared at the corner of Camille's mouth. Oh, she loved this. She was bathing in the tension. She was the reason it was all happening. Adrian checked his watch again. Heels. He was really going to do it, right now, in front of all these people. He was going to do it during his big speech. Just get through tonight. As if on cue, the DJ faded the music. A single spotlight bloomed over the small stage at the far end of the room. Heels. Adrian touched Vivian's elbow. "Come on, baby." She let him lead her. What else was there to do in that moment? Her mind was just a field of white noise. Her heart hammered so violently she could feel the vibration in her teeth. Heels. He grasped the microphone. He took her hand. He pulled her up onto the stage right next to him. "Friends," he began, "thank you. Thank you all for coming out tonight." A polite, warm wave of applause. 11 years ago, Heels. A 23-year-old kid with empty pockets and a business plan sketched on a napkin somehow convinced a 23-year-old girl who was way out of his league to marry him in a tiny courthouse in Queensgate. Laughter rippled through the room. Heels. The easy laughter of 300 wealthy people who had heard this fairy tale before. Heels. They loved the myth of it all. They loved the picture of Adrian Cole as some scrappy kid who made it. "That girl is standing right next to me tonight." He turned, his gaze falling upon her. She forced a smile onto her face. "And I want to take a moment," Heels, "in front of everyone to thank her. Because she has been a partner to me in every single sense of the word. She has been patient. She has been loyal. She has worked. A lot of you don't know this, Heels. But she has worked in this business right alongside me from the very start, since before it even was a business. Vivian built Cole Hale with me, and I am more grateful than I could ever say." This time, the applause was a thunderous roar. Heels. Near the front, a woman was actually dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Vivian just waited for the other shoe to drop. "But," Adrian said, there it was. "But," he continued, "people grow, people change." Heels. "And sometimes the partner who helped you build the ship isn't the partner you need to captain it out into open water." The room fell dead silent. "I've done a lot of thinking this past year. A lot of praying. A lot of, heels. A lot of hard looking in the mirror. And I finally understood that Vivian and I, we love each other. We will always love each other. But we want different things now. And it would be a lie to both of us to keep pretending. Heels. Vivian could feel the heat of the spotlight on her skin, as blinding as a flashlight held inches from her face. Heels. She didn't move. She didn't shed a tear. Her eyes found a point on the back wall, a tiny crack in the plaster she'd told the decorator to fix weeks ago he hadn't. She just stared at it. Vivian, Adrian said. Heels. His voice thick with something that sounded like sorrow but was anything but. I will always be grateful tonight with you and with all of you, because I'm done pretending. I am done doing things the wrong way. He turned then, Heels, extending a hand out toward the crowd, and Camille ascended the 3 small steps onto the stage as if she were walking toward her own coronation. This is Camille, Adrian announced. She is the woman I want to captain this ship with. Heels. Somewhere in the silent crowd, a glass slipped from a hand and shattered on the floor. No one moved. Vivian, Adrian said, turning to her, his eyes glistening, and she finally saw it. Heels. She understood with perfect clarity for the first time in 11 years that Adrian Cole could cry on command. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't know another way to do this. You deserve a fresh start, Heels. You deserve to find a partner who can make you happy, and I hope one day we can. She took the microphone right out of his hand. She hadn't planned it. Heels. Her body simply acted before her mind could protest. Adrian flinched. That flinch was the single best thing that had happened to her all night. He hadn't seen it coming. He'd planned everything. Every word, every lighting change, every single moist, Heels, theatrical tear. But he hadn't planned on her reaching out and taking the microphone. She raised it to her lips. The entire room held its breath. Thank you, Adrian, she said. Her voice was steady. It was her own. Hearing it from outside herself, Heels, she was amazed at how calm it sounded. Thank you, she said again, for being so honest with all of us tonight. I know that must have taken courage. For just a split second, confusion washed over Adrian's face. And Camille, she said, Heels, turning to the other woman, welcome. Heels, truly. Camille's smile was shaky now. I hope he is to you, Vivian said, her voice clear as a bell. Everything he has been to me. She handed the microphone back to him. She stepped down from the stage. She walked the entire length of that ballroom, Heels, past 300 of the city's most powerful people, and not a single person uttered a word, because what was there to say? As she passed one table, a woman reached out and briefly touched her wrist. Vivian didn't look to see who it was. Heels. In the grand front hall, Marisol was waiting. Marisol had heard. The entire staff had heard. You could feel it in the air of the house the way you can feel an approaching storm. Mrs. Cole, Mari, I need a suitcase. Mrs. Cole, I need a suitcase. Heels, the small black one. Heels. Pack for me. Pack anything. The blue jeans. Get the cash from the safe in my closet. The combination is our anniversary. You know it. Go. Please, just go. Marisol was gone in a flash. Heels. Vivian stood in the foyer of the home she had decorated piece by piece, her eyes fixed on the chandelier she'd found in a little shop in Milan 6 years ago. She didn't cry. She was calm. She was unnervingly calm. Heels. That calm was a sheet of thin ice she was standing on, knowing that one wrong move would send her plunging into the freezing water below. Knowing she couldn't afford to move wrong. Marisol returned in 4 minutes flat with the small black suitcase. Heels. She draped a coat over Vivian's shoulders. Your passport is in the front pocket, Marisol whispered, and I put my sister's address in Redondo in there. She will take you in. Don't you argue. Heels. Just go there. Don't tell him, Mari urged. Don't you tell him where you've gone, Mrs. Cole. I won't. Don't tell anyone. You hear me? Not your mother, not your friends, not that lawyer. Nobody. I won't. Heels. Marisol's hands trembled as she cupped Vivian's face between them the way you hold a child's. You are going to be okay, she said fiercely. You hear me? You're going to be so okay that one day, Heels, he is going to wake up in a cold sweat just thinking about how okay you are. Vivian kissed her forehead, then walked out of the house. A town car was waiting in the driveway. Not hers, just one of the fleet hired for valet. Heels. The driver was a man in his 60s with a gray mustache, a man who, she'd learn later, had driven a cab in this city for 30 years before taking this fancier gig. Heels. He watched her come down the steps, alone, carrying a suitcase and a formal gown. He got out and opened the back door for her without saying a single word. The airport, she said, her voice catching. Please. Yes, ma'am. Which one? I don't care. Heels. He met her eyes in the rearview mirror. Which terminal, ma'am? A sound that was almost a laugh bubbled up in her throat. It almost escaped. The one, she said. With flights leaving the soonest. He drove. He asked no more questions. At some point, he turned up the heat, noticing she was shivering, but he didn't say anything about it. About halfway to the airport, he spoke, his voice very quiet. My wife left me 22 years ago, ma'am, with a suitcase on a night just like this one. She's doing real good now. I just want you to know that. Vivian pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window, and finally, she cried. She used cash to buy a ticket for the first flight she could get, a red-eye to Lisbon with a layover in Newark. She was still wearing the champagne-colored gown. The woman at the ticket counter looked at her as if she was bursting with questions, but professionally decided against asking any of them. Vivian found a 24-hour shop in the terminal, bought a pair of leggings and a sweatshirt, and changed in a bathroom stall. She stuffed the expensive dress into the trash can, not into her suitcase, into the trash. It needed to be in the trash. On the plane, from a window seat, she watched the lights of the city she had spent her entire adult life in shrink to glittering pinpricks, and she thought with a clarity that was shocking. She had expected to feel grief, but what she felt was something sharper. Something much colder. Model. It was all so clean. In that house, I was already a memory, a ghost haunting the hallways of a life I thought was mine. I just hadn't realized it yet. Now the title is official, and it's quiet. She closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she allowed herself to think about the girl she was before Adrian Cole. The one who grew up in a little ranch house in a town called Saltbrook, daughter of a high school math teacher and a real estate agent. The girl who fought her way into a state school, holding down 2 jobs to get her degree, the one who met a loud, charming boy named Adrian at some forgotten party in a basement apartment. He had a fire in him, and he convinced her to let her own dreams burn to fuel his. That girl was sharp. She was funny. She had friends, she had plans, a whole future laid out in Chicago, a favorite coffee shop, a song that meant everything. Somewhere high above the Atlantic, Vivian tried to find the melody of that favorite song, and there was nothing, just silence. And in that silence, she knew. She truly knew that the disappearing act had started years ago. Tonight was merely the eulogy. So she never went to Lisbon. In Newark, she simply walked off the plane and never looked back. She paid cash for another ticket, this one leading to a smaller city, a place where no one knew her name. She resurrected a middle name her mother had given her, and a maiden name that hadn't been hers in 11 years, Vivian Rose Lang. The agent punched in the letters, didn't even blink. Her phone had been dark since the ballroom. In the sterile silence of a bathroom stall, she powered it on, watching as the ghosts of her old life flooded the screen. 47 missed calls. 113 text messages. Voicemails from her mother, frantic. From sisters-in-law she barely knew. One from a woman she hadn't spoken to in 3 years, now suddenly overflowing with concern. And Adrian. 6 unheard messages from Adrian. The last one timestamped at 2:14 a.m., his voice thick with things she no longer wanted to understand. She didn't listen. She scrolled through the first 3 texts, then stopped. She couldn't read anymore. The phone felt heavy. So she dropped it into the toilet bowl and flushed. Of course, it didn't go down. It just floated there. A stupid little black mirror reflecting a life that was over. She left it there and walked away. She went to Marisol's sister, who lived in a small place above a laundromat in a town that smelled of salt and rain. Her name was Teresa. She was built softer than Marisol, but she had the same gentle eyes. She opened the door at 7 in the morning wearing a simple housecoat, and she just looked at Vivian. Standing there in a sweatshirt and leggings, a single suitcase at her feet, hair pulled back, face scrubbed clean of a life she'd left behind. Teresa didn't ask questions, she just said, Mari called, come on in, I put coffee on. So Vivian went inside. Teresa poured a cup, set it on the table in front of her, and sat down, folding her hands. My sister said you're not ready to talk about it. I'm not. All right, then we won't. Vivian reached for the coffee, but her hands were trembling. She had to put it back down. What is it you need? Teresa asked. Her voice calm and steady. Vivian had to think about that. A haircut, she said, the word tasting strange, and a job. A different name too, but I think I can figure that last part out on my own. Teresa just nodded, slow and deliberate. The haircut I can do for you right here, she offered. I used to do it on the ships, the job. I'll ask around. My cousin knows someone, a woman who runs a bookkeeping office, always needs help. Bookkeeping? You helped run a company, didn't you? I did. Then you can do bookkeeping. And Vivian laughed. Feels. It was a broken sound, a tiny shipwreck of a laugh, but it was real. Okay, she whispered. Bookkeeping. Teresa got up, pulled a pair of shears and a towel from a drawer, and came back. She stood behind Vivian, gathering the long, heavy fall of dark hair in her hands. Feels. How much are we taking off? She asked. All of it. Honey, all of it is a whole lot. All of it. There was a pause. A quiet moment where the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then Teresa said, okay. The scissors began their work, a quiet, metallic song, and long strands of who Vivian Hale used to be fell to the linoleum floor. In a kitchen over a laundromat, in a town she'd never seen before, on the day after she torched her own life and walked away with a single bag. She sat perfectly still, She closed her eyes. And for the first time in 11 years, underneath the crushing weight of the numbness, she felt something stir. It wasn't peace. It wasn't even close to peace. It was the first low rumble of a storm she didn't have a name for yet. Something patient, something that knew how to wait, something that was going to, one day, walk back into that ballroom and burn everything Adrian Cole had ever loved to ash. She didn't have the words for that yet. But Teresa, standing behind her, scissors in hand, she felt it. She'd tell her sister about it years from now. That the woman who sat down in that kitchen chair wasn't the same one who stood up. It was like something new had drifted in through the window while she was cutting, and something old had finally been allowed to leave. Vivian stared at her reflection in the small wall mirror. The hair gone, no makeup. A cheap sweatshirt from an airport. She was a stranger to herself. There, Teresa said, her voice a soft murmur. There you are. Vivian's fingers grazed the short ends of her new hair. She drew a deep, shuddering breath. Vivian is dead, she said to the mirror, to the room, to herself. Teresa said nothing. Outside, a truck rumbled past, making the old building tremble. The morning light filtered in, gray and uncertain. 4,000 miles away, Adrian Cole was standing alone in the middle of his silent, empty house, still dressed in his tuxedo, dialing a number that would never again connect. He didn't know it yet. It would be a long, long time before he understood that he had just struck the match that would incinerate his entire world. He had made only one mistake, you see. He threw her away without first checking to see if she was replaceable. She wasn't. And 3 years from that morning, a black car with dark windows would glide to a curb in the old city. A man with silver at his temples and a weapon beneath his jacket would get out first, then turn and offer his hand to the woman inside. And she would take it. She would step from the shadow into the light, and the world that Adrian Cole had so carefully constructed would finally begin to crumble. But all of that was still 3 years away. For now, there was just a kitchen, a laundromat downstairs, and the woman who had once been Vivian Hale lifting a coffee cup with both hands. She drank, and it was, without question, the best coffee she had ever tasted in her life. That cup of coffee in Teresa's kitchen was the first sacrament of a new existence. Not that Vivian saw it that way then. Back then, it was just something to hold. Her hands needed something to do. If they had nothing to do, they would start to shake again. And shaking was a luxury she could no longer afford. Not today. Not ever again. Teresa didn't push. That was the first gift. The second was a small cot in a spare room that was more of a large closet with a window. The third was a shoebox she pulled from under her bed. It held $942. Teresa slid it across the table. This is a loan, she said. Pay me back if you can. If you can't, well, I never really had it anyway. No shame in it. Take it. Mari told me what she packed for you. That's a lot of money, but it's not enough for a woman who doesn't realize how much it costs to become nobody. It'll go faster than you think. Take this. Put it somewhere separate. Vivian took it. The woman with the bookkeeping office was named Rhoda. Her business was in a former dentist's office just off the boardwalk. She didn't ask to see a resume. She just gave Vivian a column of figures and told her to add them up in her head. When Vivian gave her the answer faster than her calculator could, Rhoda just said, "You can start on Monday. I'll pay you cash, no benefits." And you don't tell the other girls what you're making, because it's more. Thank you, Vivian said. Rhoda just shook her head. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you stop walking around looking like someone just died. But she didn't stop looking that way. Not for a long time. For the first month in Teresa's closet, she never slept for more than 3 hours. She would just lie there on that cot, staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked a little like the state of Ohio, and she would wait for her own body to betray her. And sometimes it did. Sometimes at 2 in the morning, feels, the phantom taste of champagne would rise in her throat, and she'd hear Adrian's voice. We want different things now, and her stomach would clench so hard she'd have to sit up, press her palms flat against the thin mattress, feels, and count the threads in the blanket until the wave of sickness passed. She counted so many threads that first month. She knew the pattern of that blanket like a prayer. The hardest part was not calling her mother. She knew she was in Fort Lauderdale, Hills, probably sick with worry. Vivian bought a postcard at a gas station one day and mailed it with no return address. Hills. I'm alive, I'm safe. Please don't look for me. I love you. I'll be back when I can. She knew that postcard would break her mother's heart and that forgiveness would take a long, long time. But she also knew it would come, eventually. Hills. She refused to think about Adrian. Or, if she did, it was like thinking about a space where a tooth used to be. You're aware of the emptiness, you know it's healing, but you make a conscious choice not to poke at it with your tongue. Hills. And Camille. She didn't think of Camille at all. Camille wasn't a person, she was just a fact. In the 3rd month, she found the library. It was a squat brick building, and the reading room always smelled like old paper and lemon-scented polish. Hills. And so, after work every single day, Vivian went there. She went to the library and she read. She consumed finance. She devoured accounting. She absorbed tax law. She studied the lives of men who had built fortunes, lost them, and then somehow, Hills, built them all over again. For a long, quiet stretch, she lost herself in the architecture of shell companies and the shadows of offshore trusts. A legal pad balanced on her knee, Hills, taking notes in a script that didn't feel like her own. A handwriting that belonged to someone other than Vivian Hale. She wasn't aware, not yet, that she was preparing for war. She told herself it was just to keep her mind from turning on itself, Hills. But somewhere deep beneath the surface, a new self was being assembled. A picture was slowly coming into view, bleeding into existence like a Polaroid held in a trembling hand. Hills. They had made her sign her own name away, erasing her from the company she helped build. Fine. But the one thing they couldn't take was her memory. It was an astonishingly good memory. Perfect, even. Adrian had always told her so. Usually, Hills. He'd used it as a weapon against her in their fights. You bring up every little thing, but now it was her weapon. She could see the entire structure of Cole Hale in her mind. She remembered the web of subsidiaries, the partners, the suppliers, Hills, the banks that kept it all afloat. She remembered who owed Adrian favors, and more importantly, who Adrian was in debt to. She recalled which accountants he put his faith in, and the ones he never would. On a yellow legal pad, Hills, sitting in the quiet of the library reading room, on a rain-soaked Tuesday in her 4th month of this new life, she wrote down everything. From memory alone, it filled 43 pages. Hills. She took the pad and hid it beneath her mattress, and for a year and a half, she wouldn't let herself touch it again. Hills. In her 6th month, Rhoda glanced up from her ledger one morning. Vivian, she said. Lang, isn't it? Vivian Lang? Yes. You ever gonna tell me who you really are? Probably not. Okay. Rhoda scribbled something onto a pink message slip, Hills, then slid it across the desk. Vivian picked it up. On it was a name, Abriel Moss, and a phone number. A friend of mine handles payroll for a lot of the shipping companies down the coast, Rhoda said, her voice low. Hills. She needs someone who knows what they're doing and keeps their mouth shut. Pays double what I can. Plus, she lives somewhere a whole lot bigger than this town, which I'm guessing might be good for you. I like it here. No, Rhoda said. You don't, Hills. You're just too afraid to go. Vivian stared at the pink slip of paper. She looked up at Rhoda, with her dyed red hair and a sweater with a cartoon cat on it. Rhoda, who for 6 months had been the only thing resembling a friend she'd allowed into her life. Hills. Rhoda, she asked, her voice quiet, why are you doing this for me? Rhoda just shrugged. Because you're wasting away in my dentist's office. And because a couple months after you got here, I started paying attention to a certain story in the news. Hills. I started connecting some dots. I figured it wasn't my business to ask you about it. But if the sort of people who write checks to that woman in that story ever came looking for you, well, I figure the further away you are, the better. Hills. Vivian said nothing. I'm not going to ask, Rhoda insisted. I'm just saying, call Abriel. So she called Abriel. 2 weeks later, she was on a bus with her suitcase, a bigger one this time, heading 3 states south. Hills. Bound for a port city she'd never seen, A place where the air hung heavy with the smell of diesel and salt water, and where nobody, not a single soul for 400 miles in any direction, had ever heard the name Vivian Hale. Aubriel Moss, it turned out, Heels, was a 5'5" tall black woman in her late 50s. She had a voice like a bucket of gravel and a faded tattoo of a mermaid on her forearm, a story she never told, Heels. She ran her business from the second floor of a building that was a hat factory back in 1923 and was now home to immigration lawyers and one very lost-looking dentist, Heels. Abriel hired Vivian that very same day over a cup of coffee in a diner just across from the bus station. "I don't give a damn who you were before," Abriel said. "I care about who you are on Tuesday at 9 a.m. You show up on Tuesday at 9 a.m. Heels. You and I will be just fine. I'll be there. Rhoda says you're sharp. I'm okay. Rhoda doesn't call anyone sharp, so you're sharp. Don't be modest with me. It's boring." For the first time in a long time, Vivian almost smiled. "You have a place to stay?" Heels. "Not yet. There's a flat over the office. Smells like mothballs. You can have it for what I paid for it, which is nothing, because the landlord owes me a few favors. You want it?" "Yes." "Done. Let's go." Heels. And just like that, Vivian Lang had a home. A one-bedroom apartment above a payroll office in a city where the water was always green and the foghorns cried all through the night. It was where she would live for the next 11 months of her life, Heels. And it was there, on a Thursday night the following February, that she would cross paths with Roman Vercetti for the very first time. Of course, she didn't know it was him. She didn't even know the name Vercetti, Heels. Abriel's company managed the books for 24 shipping outfits. Most were on the level, but some of them, as Vivian figured out within her first 3 weeks, were not. She learned not to ask about the ones that weren't, Heels. She just crunched the numbers she was given, quietly flagging any oddities for Abriel, who always took care of them. On the Thursday it all happened. Abriel was at a funeral in another state, and Vivian was alone in the office. It was nearly 8 p.m., Heels. She was closing out the month when the intercom buzzed. She glanced at the clock, then at the door. She pressed the button. "We're closed." "I have an appointment." "Not with me, you don't. It's with Abriel Moss." "Ms. Moss is out of town." Heels. "The office is closed." A silence, then a voice, deeper this time, with a hint of amusement in it, said, "Are you the one who flagged the Moreno invoices?" Vivian's hand froze over the button. The Moreno invoices. 3 weeks ago, Heels, she'd seen a pattern in a stack of transport receipts. Numbers that shifted in a way that suggested someone was checking to see if anyone was paying attention. Heels. She'd drafted a one-page memo and left it for Abriel. Abriel had simply said, "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll take care of it." And for Vivian, that was where the story ended. "Who is this?" she demanded. "A friend of Ms. Moss. My name is Vercetti. Roman Vercetti." Heels. "She and I go way back. I would appreciate just 5 minutes of your time." Vivian didn't move a muscle. "You can watch me on the security camera," he offered. "I'll stand right here. I'll put my hands where you can see them. I just need to come up." Heels. "It's about the invoices." She looked over at the small black and white monitor in the corner. Heels. A man stood in the building's foyer, 30 feet down and 1 floor below, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. He wore a dark coat. The camera's resolution was too poor to see his face. A part of her screamed to say no, to call Abriel. Heels. She thought about the 4-inch letter opener in her desk drawer, the one she'd started keeping in her purse after her first month, because the building felt unsafe after dark. "Come up," she said, her voice steady. Slowly, Heels. "The door at the top of the stairs is unlocked. Sit in the chair in front of my desk. Don't touch anything, ma'am." He came up. The first thing she noticed as he walked into Abriel's office was that he was older than his voice had suggested. Early 40s, Heels. He was tall, but not overwhelmingly so. Heels. There was gray touching his temples in a way that looked intentional, even though you knew it wasn't. He had a face that wasn't handsome, not in the classical sense, but it was composed, like a perfectly crafted sentence. Every feature served a purpose. Heels. Dark eyes, and a thin, pale scar that ran from the corner of his left eyebrow up into his hairline. The coat he wore cost more than the used car she'd bought in an alley 6 months ago. He slowly peeled off a pair of leather gloves, Heels, placing them in his pocket. He sat in the chair she'd indicated. He didn't put his hands where she could see them. Not really. One elbow rested on the arm of the chair, Heels. His other hand rested on his thigh. He just looked at her. He looked at her for a long time, much longer than was polite. Vivian had been looked at by men for her entire adult life. She'd been looked at with desire, with disdain, with assessment, Heels, and with utter boredom. But she had never ever been looked at the way this man was looking at her now. It was, she realized after a moment, as if he were reading a detailed report. You're Lang. I'm Lang. That's a new name.
Sorry?
I said. Feels, he repeated. That's a new name. It wasn't your name 3 years ago. Her heart did something terrible in her chest. She forced her face to remain a perfect placid mask. I don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Lang. He leaned forward. Feels. Just a fraction of an inch. I'm not here to give you any trouble. In fact, he cleared his throat, I am the very opposite of here to give you trouble. Feels. If I were here to cause you a problem, I wouldn't have buzzed and asked permission to come up. You understand that, don't you? No, I don't. Okay, let me be perfectly clear then. I don't care who you were. I care about who you are right now. Feels. And the reason I care is because 3 weeks ago, you found something in a set of books that 2 certified public accountants, one of them on my payroll, completely missed. I paid those 2 accountants a small fortune specifically to not miss things. Feels. You found it, working part-time from an office above an old hat factory. That is interesting to me. That is the only reason I am sitting in this chair. She remained silent. Abriel thinks highly of you. Feels. Abriel thinks highly of anyone who gets to work on time. Feels. No, he spoke, the word landing in the dead air between them. She doesn't. A silence settled, thick and heavy. From somewhere out on the water, a ship's horn groaned 3 times, a sound from another world. What is it you want, Mr. Vercetti? She asked. Feels. Roman, please. What do you want? He leaned forward just a fraction. I'm here to offer you a position. I have a position. I'm aware. So why this conversation? Because, he said, his voice a low thrum. Feels. The job I'm offering comes with a salary 18 times what Abriel gives you. It comes with an apartment that doesn't carry the scent of ghosts and mothballs. And it comes open because the last person who held it retired to a vineyard 3 months ago. Feels. And I've been searching with growing frustration for a replacement ever since. She just looked at him. And in that look, she knew, in that bone-deep way that needs no words, that this man was dangerous. Feels. Not like Adrian had been, with the reckless danger of a child who'd burn your world down simply because he'd forgotten you were standing in it. Feels. No, this was something else entirely. This was a man who somewhere along the road of his life had taken lives. He had made his peace with it, and he would do it again if the grim arithmetic of his world demanded it. Feels. She knew this like you know a flame will burn without ever touching it. Some ancient animal part of her screamed, do not go near. And yet, I don't know who you are, she said, her voice steady. Fair enough. Feels. And I'd prefer to know who you are before we speak of employment. He nodded, as if he expected nothing less. He moved with a deliberate slowness, reaching into the inner pocket of his coat. She couldn't help but flinch, and he froze. Feels. Then his hand moved even slower, retrieving a thin leather folder. He placed it on the desk, a silent offering between them. Feels. There are 3 pages inside, he explained. The first is a list of my business interests, some legitimate, some less so. The second is a description of the work itself. And the third page is a list of things I will not do, Feels, and that I will not ask anyone in my employ to do. That is the most important page. And what's on it? Narcotics, he said, ticking them off. Children, trafficking human beings, and any woman in any situation who has not given her consent. Those 4, Feels. There are other lines I don't cross, but those are the ones that will matter to you. And everything else? Is everything else, he confirmed. I move things from one place to another. I charge what the economy allows. Feels. I offer protection to those who pay for it, and I bring harm to those who have earned it. I stopped pretending about what I am a long time ago. That's a well-rehearsed speech. I've had occasion to give it. To whom? Feels. To every single person who has ever worked this close to me. I'm telling you now what I'd tell you in your first week anyway, because I have no use for disappointment discovered later. People who are disappointed become unreliable. Feels. And I'm just supposed to believe you. No, you shouldn't, he said. You should call Abriel tomorrow. Ask her. And then you should call a woman named Sophia at the number inside that folder. She was my accountant for 11 years. She can tell you, Feels, in her own way, exactly what I am. Then you can make your choice. Feels. She let his words hang in the stale office air. The light was terrible. Abriel was always cheap with the bulbs, and half of Roman's face was lost to shadow. He simply waited. There was no impatience in him. Feels. He had the profound stillness of a man who had waited for far more important things than a woman's answer. Why me? She finally asked. He tilted his head. I've already given you that answer. You gave me the interview answer. I want the real one. Eels. He was silent for a beat, and then the smallest hint of a smile touched his lips. It never reached his eyes, but it felt, she thought, like the first true expression she'd seen from him. "Because Abriel told me a story," he said, Eels, "about a woman who appeared on her doorstep a year ago, carrying one suitcase, with a haircut that looked like it was done with kitchen shears, and a mind for numbers that her previous boss, states away, had warned Abriel she would miss terribly, Eels. Abriel shared that story with me 3 months ago, long before I realized you were the one who had been correcting my invoices. The woman in that story, she intrigued me, and the woman I saw in the invoices intrigued me, Eels. When I learned they were the same person, I got into my car. Seems like a lot of trouble. It's a little trouble. Don't flatter yourself," he said, a ghost of humor in his tone. "I was passing through town anyway." A laugh escaped her. Eels. It surprised them both, bubbling up before she could stop it. He watched her, and a tiny muscle near the corner of his mouth twitched, and she saw it, and he saw her see it. He broke his gaze, looking down at the desk for the first time. Eels. It was the first moment his eyes had left hers since he'd walked in. "I'll think about it," she said. "Take all the time you need, as much as it takes. Call the number when you're ready. If you decide not to, I won't be back." "You won't?" Eels. "No. Even after I fixed your invoices? You did me a service. That doesn't create a debt that flows in reverse." He rose from the chair and picked up his gloves. He gave her one small, sharp nod. He paused at the door. "Mrs. Lang, yes?" Eels. He didn't quite turn around, speaking instead to the doorframe. "Whatever it was that happened to you before you walked into this city, I don't need to know. I don't want to know, Eels. I just need you to understand that I'm not going to go looking for it. The person I'm interested in is the one sitting in that chair right now. That's who I'm hiring, if you decide to be hired." And just like that, he was gone, Eels, his footsteps fading down the stairs and into the cold February night. She sat there in the silence for 20 minutes before she could move. The leather folder remained untouched. She could hear the distant cry of the harbor, a cat wailing in the alley, Eels, and the old radiator ticking, always ticking, counting down the hours before it gave up its ghost for the night. The next morning she called Abriel. "Oh, honey," Abriel said. "You know him. I know of him. How well?" "Well enough. He's honest, Eels. Those 4 things he says he won't touch, he won't. I've seen him send a man through a plate glass window for breaking 2 of those rules, Eels. He has his ugliness and he has his decency, but he never ever lies to his own people. And in his world, that is a rare thing. Abriel, I hear you. Is this a good idea? Honey, nothing you've done in the past year has been a good idea, Eels. You've been a ghost in the wind. You've been making one move after another just to survive. This is a chance to climb out of survival, and I think you're ready. I think he knows you're ready because I'm the one who told him." "Yes, Eels. I pointed him in your direction. I'll take the blame for that. I wrestled with it for a month before I made the call." Vivian said nothing. Eels. "Look, I can't tell you what to do," Abriel continued. "But I've known that man for 21 years. He doesn't fall in love. He barely even likes most people. But every once in a while, he notices someone. And that's rare, Eels. The last time I saw him look at someone the way he described you, well, that person is now his head of logistics and makes more money than God. Her name is Sophia. She'll be waiting for your call." Vivian dialed the number, Eels. Sophia picked up on the second ring and spoke for 47 minutes straight. "He's not a good man, not in the way you mean," Sophia said. "And he's not a bad man in the way you fear, Eels. He is a man who has found a way to live with being both. But what he is, always, is a man of his word. If he says he won't ask something of you, he won't. I would stake my life on it, in a way I already have." Vivian asked her if she ever regretted her choice, Eels. Sophia was quiet for a long time. "No," she finally said. "And believe me, I've asked myself that question more than you can imagine. No, I have regretted many things in my life, but never that." Vivian took the job, not that week, not even that month, Eels. She took it in April, on a day when the city's cherry trees finally surrendered their blossoms to the harbor wind. And for a few days, the air tasted almost sweet, Eels. She took it over breakfast at a diner. Roman Vercetti sat across from her, with his dry toast and black coffee, and never took off his coat. "Let's be clear," she said, before they shook hands. "I'm doing this for the money, and for the apartment, Eels. And because Sophia said I could trust you, I am not doing this for you. Understood? I don't know what you were thinking when you walked into my office in February." "I wasn't thinking anything, Ms. Lang. You were thinking something, Eels." He stirred his coffee, turning the cup over and over in his hands. I thought, he said, choosing his words with care, that you were a woman who had been through something terrible. That's all. I didn't think beyond it. Feels. And I don't think beyond it now. Good. Good. Then we understand each other. I believe we do. They didn't, not at first. They understood each other professionally, which is a different thing altogether. She moved into the apartment. Feels. A sprawling space on the top floor of a building he owned, with a balcony that stared out at the endless water. One by one, she met his people. Sophia, a tiny woman in her 60s with eyes that missed nothing and a silver braid down her back, Feels, pulled her into a hug. I'm so glad you came, she whispered. I was worried you wouldn't. Vivian didn't cry. She'd forgotten how sometime in March. But it was a near thing. The work was just work. But this was something else. Feels. She created new ledgers. Methodically, she rebuilt the delicate architecture that had existed only in Sophia's mind and raw willpower for 11 years. In her first 2 months, she unearthed a second batch of forged invoices, Feels, tracing the rot back to a dock supervisor, a man named Mancini, dealt with by Roman's people in a manner she learned not to question. She kept her eyes on her work, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she slept. 7 hours a night, Feels. Roman she saw perhaps twice a week, sometimes less. He would materialize in the fourth-floor office she occupied in a sterile industrial park, settling into the chair across from her desk. Always the same chair, always the same way. Feels, an elbow resting on the arm, a silent sentinel. Feels. And he would inquire about some small corner of the business. He would just listen, never an interruption. When she finished, he would simply say thank you, and then he would stand, and he would be gone. There was no flirtation from his side, Feels, none from hers. But there were moments. She started noticing this around the 6th month, moments when she'd turn from a filing cabinet and catch his gaze on her, and he would glance back at his papers a fraction of a second too late. Sometimes, Feels, when she laughed at a joke Sophia made, he would be standing in the doorway, and she would see the unguarded look on his face just before the mask slid back into place. One night in August, something happened at one of his restaurants. An incident, Feels. The call came at 2 in the morning. She went. It was her restaurant, on paper, and something had occurred in the back alley. Someone was hurt, and the police would arrive with the dawn, Feels, and the books needed to reflect a very specific story before that happened, Feels. There was no one else awake at 2 in the morning who could perform such a quiet miracle. She stepped into the restaurant at 2:45. Roman was there, alone in a booth at the back, Feels, his white shirt stained at the cuff with a single drop of blood. Not a lot, just a little. She didn't ask. She simply slid into the seat opposite him. She opened her laptop. For 3 hours, she worked in absolute silence. When it was done, Feels, she rotated the screen to face him. Across 6 different screens, she showed him the new truth she had built. She showed him what the police would find, and she showed him everything they never would. He stared at it for a long, long time, Feels. Then his eyes lifted to hers. Vivian, he said. It was the very first time he had ever used her first name, Feels. She had never told him it was her first name. On every piece of paper, she was Vivian Lang. Vivian was supposed to be a ghost. She let it pass. Yes, thank you. You're welcome. He reached across the table, but his hand didn't find hers. Instead, Feels, a single finger brushed the edge of her laptop, as if the machine itself was a substitute for something he couldn't touch. Go home, he said. Sleep. Take tomorrow off. The morning's fine. He almost smiled. The morning, he conceded. Feels. She walked out of that restaurant at 6 a.m. The sky over the harbor was the pale, bruised color of an oyster shell. She drove home, the cold spring air rushing through the open windows, Feels. And for the first time since Adrian Cole had ripped a microphone from her hand, she thought, I am not afraid of anything right now, Feels. I am not afraid. I am not afraid. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something else, something far more difficult to define. It felt like finding a door that finally opened after you'd spent a whole bruising year pushing against solid walls, Feels. She and Roman wouldn't kiss for another 4 months after that night. When it finally happened, there was no drama to it. It was at the bitter end of a long argument over a contract, nearly 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in his office, Feels. He said something that made her laugh, and without thinking, she reached out and touched the lapel of his coat. He looked down at her hand. Then his eyes met hers, and he said, his voice barely a whisper, Don't do that unless you mean it, Feels. What if I mean it? Then do it again. She did. They were married 10 months later, a quiet affair in the chambers of a judge who owed Roman a favor from 1998. Sophia was their only witness. Vivian wore a green dress, heels. Roman wore the same coat he'd had on in Abrielle's office the night they met, because she had asked him to. Afterward, they drove down the coast to a small house he owned perched on a cliff. They sat on the porch, watching the sun bleed over the water, heels. And he said, "You're sure about this?" And she said, "I'm sure." He looked away. "You don't know me yet." "Not really." She just looked at him. "I know enough." And he shook his head. "You don't." Heels. And she said, "Roman, stop." And he stopped. What they had, it wasn't what other people had. She knew that. He wasn't a soft man. He didn't become one for her. Heels. He was still the kind of man who could walk into a room at 3 in the morning with blood on his cuff and a perfectly calm, empty look in his eyes. And she was still the kind of woman who knew not to ask about it. Their marriage was a structure built, in part, heels on the vast, silent spaces between them. But in the words they did speak, there was a raw honesty she had never known with Adrian. Roman never performed tenderness. When it came, it was in small, quiet gestures, real, and never for an audience. Heels. He brought her coffee just the way she liked it, without ever needing to be asked. He remembered which pair of her shoes pinched her feet, and without a word had them replaced. At crowded parties, he would stand behind her, heels, his hand never leaving the small of her back. And slowly over 2 years, then 3, she started to feel like herself again. She wasn't Vivian Hale. That woman was gone forever. But she wasn't the ghost, Vivian Lang, heels, either, that terrified creature hiding above the hat factory. She was someone else entirely. Someone who managed her husband's legitimate businesses with a cold precision that made old men in expensive suits stammer apologies to her, heels. Someone who could enter a charity auction on Roman's arm and own the room in a way she once had so long ago in a grand ballroom, heels. Except this room was hers. The people in it had no idea what her real name was, or the name of the husband she had buried deep in her own memory. They couldn't know that the woman in the midnight blue gown, her hand resting on the wrist of a terrifying man, heels, had once been the quiet wife of someone in another city who thought he had simply thrown her away. They didn't know. But one of them, one evening in their 3rd year together, would say a name at a cocktail party. "Adrian Cole," the man would say, heels. "Heard about Cole Hale? Apparently, they've lost the Sheridan account. Word is the whole house of cards will be down by Christmas." And Roman, who was half turned away speaking to someone else, would feel her ghost still beside him, heels. The smallest change in pressure, the kind of infinitesimal shift only a man who pays attention to his wife's very breathing would ever notice. He wouldn't ask her, heels. Not that night. He would ask the next morning, over coffee on the porch of the little house on the cliff where they'd gone for the weekend. He would set his cup down. He would say, "Who is Adrian Cole?" And she would just look at him. For a very long time, heels, she would just look. Then she'd put down her own cup, go inside the house, and return with a yellow legal pad, the very same one pulled from under a mattress in a moth-eaten apartment years ago. Its edges were brittle now, heels. Its 43 pages filled with a handwriting she could barely recognize as her own. She would place it on the small iron table between them. "Read this," she would say, "and when you're done, I'm going to ask you a question." He would read, heels. It would take him nearly an hour. He said nothing the entire time. The wind coming off the water would sometimes lift the pages, and she would reach over and smooth them flat again, heels. When he finished, he would close the pad. He would look at her. His face was a mask, just as it had been that first night in Abrielle's office, but his hand on the table was turned palm up. "Open. Ask me," he would say, and she would draw a breath, heels, and she would finally say the words she had carried for 3.5 years, the words she never said in Teresa's kitchen, or Rhoda's office, or Abrielle's apartment, not even in her own wedding vows, heels. The words that had been glowing inside her like a hot coal buried under ash. "Roman," she would say, "I want to go home." He didn't reply right away. He set the legal pad on the table and stared out at the water, the wind tugging at the collar of his shirt, heels. For a long while, the only sound was the sea endlessly working against the rocks below, heels. Then he said, "Home? Yes. Home where you were before? Yes. Not the home you and I have been talking about. No." He gave a single slow nod. He picked up his coffee, which had long since gone cold, and drank it anyway. He set the cup back down. "Vivian," heels, he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think before you answer, okay? Do you want this because you truly want it, heels? Or do you want this because you have been planning it in the quiet parts of your mind for so long that you no longer know if it's a desire, or if it's just something that has to happen to you, whether you want it or not? She didn't answer quickly, Eels. She didn't answer for almost a full minute. The wind stirred the pages of the legal pad, and she put her hand down on them again, her eyes never leaving his. I don't know, she said at last. Both, maybe, Eels. A thing I had to do to stay alive. The reading, the notes, Eels. I was going under, Roman. I needed a shoreline, anything solid to pull myself toward, and that was the only one I could see, because it was the life I had just been thrown from. But then the drowning stopped, and I met you, Eels, and a part of me thought, maybe I could just let it all sink, leave that legal pad tucked away forever, become someone new, your wife, someone who runs your ledgers and grows old on this porch. For the longest time, I really believed I had let it go, Eels. And then someone said his name at a party. Just someone said his name at a party. He was silent. This isn't about him, she whispered. I need you to hear that. It has nothing to do with him as a man. If he'd ended it in private, given me my half and just said, Eels, I'm sorry, Viv. Eels, I found someone else. I would never have picked up that pen. I would have wept for a year maybe, and then I would have moved on, married some dentist back in Connecticut. But this isn't that. This is Roman, Eels. He did it in a room with 300 people watching. He'd spent 6 months quietly erasing my name from the company, and then he did it in front of 300 people. He had a whole speech prepared. He made his girlfriend walk up on that stage, Eels, and he treated it like a coronation. And then when I left, he called the cops. Did you know that? He called the police on me. Said I had stolen from him. From him, Eels. He had his lawyer call every bank we'd ever touched and freeze any account with my name on it before my plane had even touched down somewhere safe. Eels. I never knew. I never told you. I'm telling you now. Okay, I don't want him to be sorry, Roman. Sorry doesn't cost anything. I don't want an apology. I don't even really need him to suffer. I want him to understand. I want him sitting in a chair, Eels. A single chair. In a room with me standing right there in front of him, and I want him to look at my face and finally get it. That he made a mistake of a very specific magnitude. I want to see that understanding land in his eyes, Eels. And then I want to turn around and walk out of that room. And that's it. The empire, she said. That falls apart on its own. It's already crumbling. I've been watching all the cracks spread for a year now. What I want is the room, Eels, and the chair and the understanding. Everything else is just the... Roman watched her for a very long time. You haven't used the word revenge, he finally said. I don't want that word, Eels. Why not? Because it doesn't belong to me. Revenge is a word for people who were denied what they needed. But I got what I needed. I got a life. I got you. This isn't revenge, Roman. This is an audit. For 3.5 years, Eels, he's been living his life with a ledger that doesn't add up, and I am simply going to balance it. That's all. And then I'm coming home. He reached his hand across the small iron table. He placed it over hers right on top of the legal pad. All right, he said. Eels. All right, we'll go. Roman. Vivian, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. He gave her hand one firm squeeze. I'm going to anyway, because you asked, and because I want to see him. Don't. I want to see the man who did that to you. Eels. I want to stand in a room with him. Eels. I won't lay a hand on him. You have my word. You ask for a chair and a room and for him to understand, and that is precisely what you are going to get. But I will be in that room. Why? Because I want him to know that you have somebody now. Who you have. Eels. What that means. I want that image burned into the back of his mind for the rest of his life every time he closes his eyes. She didn't argue. She could have. But she didn't. They didn't rush. That was Roman's way. Eels. Rushing is for people without the luxury of time. They had time. They took 4 months to prepare. In those 4 months, Eels, Vivian worked from a climate-controlled office high up in one of Roman's skyscrapers, and she rebuilt the entire world of Cole Hale from memory, from Sophia's digging, from 3 private investigators, and from a woman named Jean who 12 years ago, Eels, had been Adrian's personal assistant and had left his service in Eels. 2019 after something happened, something she wouldn't describe in detail to Vivian, but whose shape Vivian understood perfectly. Jean had since moved into a quiet life, a completely different field. Jean had also kept copies, Eels. Copies of many things she was never supposed to keep. When contacted through a third party with a significant amount of cash, Jean handed them all over with what she confessed to Sophia was an immense sense of relief, Eels. What Vivian pieced together over those 4 months made even Roman's eyebrow arch. The empire Adrian Cole had constructed wasn't an empire at all. It was a castle made of papier-mâche, and it had been a papier-mâche castle, as it turned out, since at least 2021. His core business had been hemorrhaging money for 3 straight years, a fact he was concealing with a dizzying carousel of short-term loans. 2 of those loans came from men Roman knew personally and thoroughly disliked. Adrian had sold off the Sheridan contract at a steep loss just to cover a margin call back in December. He was leveraged to the hilt against a building he didn't even truly own. And Camille Devereaux, the woman he had elevated over Vivian on that stage in front of 300 people, had been named in a civil suit from another state back in 2023, something about an investment scheme. It was a little problem Adrian's lawyers had made vanish, but the record still existed for anyone who knew to look for it on the server of a tiny firm in a Midwestern city that Sophia's people accessed without making a sound. The only thing holding the entire Cole-Hale illusion together was Adrian's personal reputation. His talent for sitting down across from a banker, and with that booming voice and that slick smile, convincing the man he was good for the money, and for now he was. But he was good for it in the way a man juggling 9 knives is good at juggling. One slip, just one. One tiny, perfectly timed wobble. He's a stupid man, Sophia remarked one afternoon in the office, tapping the printout of a loan schedule with the end of her pen. He is a stupid, vain man. I almost feel bad for him. Almost. Then I remember what your face looked like that first month you were in Abriel's apartment, and I stopped feeling sorry. Don't do that, Sophia. Do what? Defend me, not like that. It will make me cry, and I am done crying in this office. Sophia just patted her hand. Cry somewhere better then. The plan they designed was quiet. This was the one thing Vivian insisted on, despite Roman's gentler reservations. She didn't want an explosion. She didn't want a news report. No headlines, no arrests, no perp walks down courthouse steps. What she wanted, she explained, was a slow unnodding. She wanted Adrian Cole to wake up one Monday morning to discover a supplier had suddenly gone silent. On Tuesday, a different one. On Wednesday, the bank that held his biggest line of credit would, with unnerving politeness, request an urgent meeting. On Thursday, the investor he was banking on to rescue him, a man in another state Roman knew through social circles, would casually mention over lunch with a mutual acquaintance that he was no longer comfortable with the Cole-Hale deal. For reasons he couldn't quite explain. They wouldn't lift a finger themselves. They would just make calls. They would just remind people, one by one, of facts they already knew, but had chosen to ignore for the sake of Adrian's charm. They would simply lay the truth on the table and let the truth do the work. And then, Vivian said the night before their flight, we go to the event. The fundraiser. The fundraiser. He will be there. He never misses that one. It's his favorite room. Viv, yes. Are you sure you want to do this part? Walk in there? Yes, I'm sure. He'll be standing right there. He'll have his wife with him. Camille, I mean, the one he married last year. There will be cameras. There will be 300 people. I know. The last time you were in a room like that with him. I know, Roman. I don't want you walking into a kind of pain you haven't prepared for. She turned to face him. They were in the bedroom of the little house on the cliff, the place that had, over the years, become their sanctuary for the most serious conversations. She wore a robe. He was in a t-shirt and sweatpants, an outfit almost no one on earth but her ever saw him in. In that moment, he looked younger than his years. He looked worried. It won't hurt me in the way you're imagining, she said, her voice soft. You can't know that. No, I do. Because I am not the same woman. The woman he destroyed is gone. She died on an airplane somewhere over the Atlantic, Roman. I buried her myself. The person who walks into that room is not her. He cannot humiliate the person who walks into that room. He no longer possesses the tools. He studied her face for a long, quiet moment. I believe you, he said. I still wish you didn't have to be in that room. I know, but I understand why you have to be. I know. All right, all right. He gathered her into his arms. She let him. They just stood there like that, for a very long time. They landed in the city she had fled 3 years and 8 months before on a Wednesday afternoon in October. The light had that specific sharp, low, golden quality of that coastline in the fall. A light she'd forgotten until the plane descended over the water, and she saw it glinting off the skyscrapers, and a small involuntary noise escaped her. Roman heard it. He didn't look at her, he just took her hand. They didn't check into any of the hotels her old life frequented. They stayed in an apartment Roman kept under a shell corporation, Eels, in a part of town that had been nothing in her day and was now packed with trendy restaurants with single-word names. She slept deeply that first night. She had thought she wouldn't. She'd expected to lie awake, hearing Adrian's voice, Eels, hearing the phantom shatter of a glass on a ballroom floor. Instead, she slept for 8 solid hours and woke to Roman setting a cup of coffee on her bedside table and saying, "It's beginning." "Which one?" "The bank." "So soon?" "You wanted it slow." "Heels," he said. "Not late." "Heels." She pressed a smile into her pillow. But at the end of that same week, in an office on the 40th floor of a tower bearing his own name, Adrian Cole was staring at the same numbers for the 3rd straight day. Heels. His left eye had started to jump, that nervous tell he got when everything was about to go wrong. And Camille, his Vaishu who was, to her credit, sharper than most people thought, stood in the doorway asking him what was wrong. Heels, and he gave her only silence. A friend still inside that office, for reasons of her own, texted the news to Sophia. Sophia told Vivian, and Vivian just listened, her voice quiet, and said, "Let it burn." The bank called for a meeting on Thursday. Eels. His supplier went dark on Friday. By the next Monday, 2 quiet phone calls were placed by powerful men in other states to powerful men in his. Eels. And by Wednesday of that second week, Adrian Cole was making his own calls, and not a single person was picking up. He still had no idea what was happening to him. That was the one thing Vivian had been adamant about. He shouldn't know. Eels. He shouldn't understand what was happening to him until the night of the fundraiser. That morning, Vivian Verschetti stood before a tall mirror in a penthouse suite, in a part of the city that hadn't even been built when she fled, Eels, and she stared at someone she didn't know. The stranger wore a dress the color of blood from a severed artery, a dress with no sequins, no sparkle. It was the kind of dress a woman wears when she is the main event. Her hair was up but softly, Eels, with a few strands left to trace the line of her neck. Her face was almost bare, Eels. The earrings were studs. The watch on her wrist, a birthday gift from Roman, was the most valuable thing she wore, and only a handful of people in that room tonight would even recognize the brand, because it never advertised. She looked, she thought, Eels, like a woman in her late 30s who had been dragged through hell and had come back carrying secrets. She looked like a woman you don't lie to a second time. Roman appeared behind her. He was dressed in black, Eels, always black on nights that were going to change things. He placed his hands on her shoulders. "Are you ready?" "No." "Good. Ready is for amateurs." A small laugh escaped her. She turned, fixed his tie. "One rule," he said. "What's that?" "Eels, if you want to leave at any point, we leave." "Eels. I don't care if we're mid-sentence. I don't care who we're talking to. You just squeeze my hand twice, and we're gone. No discussion. Roman, promise me." "I promise." He nodded, then offered her his arm. Eels. They rode to the event in a car so silent she could hear the sound of her own blood. The driver never met her eyes in the rear view. He'd been with Roman for 11 years. He knew the difference between a simple night out and a night that was a reckoning. Eels. The fundraiser was being held in a hotel ballroom just 10 blocks from the house she once shared with Adrian Cole. She'd been in this very ballroom 4 times in her other life. The carpet was the same hideous pattern of green and gold she'd always despised. Eels. The doorman wasn't the same. She recognized no one at the entrance, and as they stepped from the car, she knew with certainty that no one there could possibly recognize her. Eels. To the world she once inhabited, she now understood, a ghost. Her hair, cut short and dark now, the fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. The very way she held herself, Eels, so different from the way Vivian Hale used to move through a room. It all made her a woman who didn't exist in anyone's memory. She could brush past someone she'd had dinner with 50 times, and they wouldn't even flinch. She'd counted on this, Eels, but planning for it and feeling it hit you in the lobby of that hotel, they were 2 very different things. "Breathe," Roman whispered. "I am." Slower. She slowed her breathing. They were announced at the door. Eels. "Verschetti," the man called out. "Mr. and Mrs. Roman Verschetti." A few people looked up. The name was new to this circle, and new names in this circle were often attached to bigger fortunes than the old ones. And besides, Vivian, in that red dress, Eels, she was the kind of woman you had to look at twice. A man she'd never met waved to Roman from across the ballroom. Roman gave a slight nod back but made no move to go to him. "Who's that?" she asked. "A man I sold a racehorse to in 2019. Eels." He has a lot of money and very little power. Stay with me. They moved through the crowd. She didn't search for Adrian. She let Roman guide her, his hand resting on the small of her back, heels. His head bent toward her, as if she were telling him something fascinating. Heels. She'd mastered the art over the years of looking completely captivated without saying a word. A useful trick. It discouraged interruptions. She spotted Camille first. Camille was near the bar, dressed in emerald green, holding a champagne flute, heels, laughing at something some man was saying. She looked a little older. A certain tension had settled around her mouth that wasn't there 4 years ago. Her hair was a shade blonder. She looked, Vivian decided, heels, like a woman who got everything she ever wanted, and then discovered it all came with crushing debt. Just behind her, in a small group of men by a cocktail table, Adrian Cole stood with his back angled to the room, his laugh too loud. Heels. He'd put on some weight. Not a lot, but you could see it. His hair, once his vanity, was thinning on the crown. He wore a tuxedo that didn't hang right, the way his old ones did, and she knew instantly he hadn't switched tailors. Heels. He'd just stopped making the appointments. He was drinking whiskey from a heavy glass, his voice booming over the chatter. Look, I told him, he was saying. I said, Frank, the numbers don't lie. And 2 of the 3 men with him were giving that polite, heels, vacant nod people give when they are desperate for an escape. She stopped moving. Roman felt it and stopped with her. There, she said quietly, by the window, the small circle, heels, the ill-fitting tuxedo. Roman's eyes shifted, but his expression remained a perfect, that's him, yes. That's him. He's not as tall as I imagined. Almost everything about him is smaller than you'd imagine. And they just stood there, heels, the 2 of them, in the heart of that ballroom for what felt like an eternity but was maybe 30 seconds. Adrian Cole never looked their way. He had no idea he was being watched. He was lost in a story, heels, the kind of story she'd heard him tell 100 times before, about some deal he'd crushed, some guy he'd outsmarted, about how the other guy never saw it coming, heels. The 2 men with him were checking their phones now, and one was looking right past Adrian's shoulder at some woman across the room. At the bar, Camille wasn't laughing anymore. Do you want to handle this now? Roman asked, his voice low. No. When then? Heels. After he gives his speech. Roman shot her a look. He's speaking? Always does, at this event. He's on the board. Delivers the keynote address every single year. It's the highlight of his social calendar. How did you know he was still on the board? Heels. I checked. A ghost of a smile touched Roman's lips as he looked at the floor. All right, he said, after the speech. They moved back, taking 2 champagne flutes from a waiter who glided past. Heels. Vivian never took a sip. She just held the glass because her hands needed a job to do, just like they had in Teresa's kitchen 4 long years ago. A woman in a gold dress came toward them, the wife of some philanthropic heavyweight. Heels. Vivian faintly remembered her. The woman had no idea who she was. She introduced herself to Roman, who was charming polite. The woman talked about her latest charity project, then asked if the Versettis might attend another function next month. Heels. Roman told her his office would be in touch. The woman floated away. Across the room, Adrian Cole finally turned and did his scan of the crowd, that predatory sweep he always did, searching for the next useful person, the next hand to shake. Heels. And his eyes slid right over Vivian. Not a pause, not a flicker. The man she was married to for 11 years, the man who declared to 300 people that she would never be enough for him. His gaze passed over her like she was a floor lamp. Heels. Something inside her, a small, vicious thing she had held onto for so long she'd forgotten its name, finally let go. It wasn't victory. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling, she thought, of finally taking off a shoe you'd worn for years, heels, and only then realizing just how much it had been hurting you. He didn't see me, she murmured. He saw you, Roman said. He just didn't know who he was looking at. That's the same thing. Heels. No, he said. It's really not. She looked up at him. Trust me, he said. It's not. The speeches started at 9. The committee chairman went first, a man with a booming laugh who was deeply, profoundly boring. He even knew it, kept apologizing for it, heels, and the audience laughed on cue. Vivian drank her water. Then it was Adrian's turn. He walked onto the stage, fiddled with the microphone. And there, in the bright spotlight, he looked exactly like a man who had spent 3 weeks getting his calls ignored, heels. His face was slick with sweat. He'd had 1 whiskey too many. You could see the dampness on his shirt collar. But he was still Adrian Cole. He still had that voice. Heels. When he began to speak, the entire room, almost at its own will, seemed to lean in his direction. Friends, he started. Good evening. A few muffled replies came back. It's a privilege, as it always is, to be here before you, Beals, representing the Belfort Committee. For 4 minutes he spoke. He spoke of the fine work the committee had accomplished this past year. He spoke of children in a distant city, some of their faces projected on a screen behind him, Beals, and he spoke of the profound impact their money had made. He talked about how deeply affected he was during his personal visit to see those children last February. A visit that never happened, Beals. A trip that was really a weekend at a golf resort 2 states away with Camille. Vivian knew this, of course. Jean had given her the receipts months ago, and Sophia had cross-referenced them with the resort, Beals. He was just getting to the part where he challenged everyone in the room to donate even more. And then he faltered. He stopped speaking, his eyes narrowing as he stared out into the darkness at a table near the back. A half-beat later, Beals, Vivian knew he was looking at her. Or not right at her, but at something about her. Maybe the slight angle of her head, the line of her jaw. His gaze had found her completely by accident. She hadn't shifted an inch. She had done nothing to be seen, Beals, but his eyes caught on her like a snag in fine silk. He frowned. The room, which was far from foolish, felt the shift in the air. The room leaned in just a little closer. He parted his lips to speak, then closed them. His eyes fell to his notes. Beals. He looked up again. He spoke, but the resonance was gone from his voice. It was no longer a powerful boom. It was brittle. He said, thank you, everyone, Beals. Thank you for your, I want to thank. And he just fumbled through the final line of a speech he'd delivered 100 times before. A line about lifting one another up, a line he once took pride in, and he couldn't even finish it, Beals. He passed the microphone back to the chairman. He stepped down from the stage. He never glanced her way again. But from across the ballroom, she could see the back of his neck flush a deep red. Next to her, Roman shifted his weight. He saw something. Beals, he murmured. He saw something. He doesn't know what it is yet. No, but he's about to. Beals. When? Right now. She placed her water glass on the table with deliberate care. She looked up at Roman. Walk with me, she said, and he did. They didn't slice through the center of the ballroom. They moved through it the way Roman always navigated a space. Beals, hugging the perimeter. Unrushed, with no obvious destination. They passed a table of guests. They passed a server. They passed a Senator Vivian had been seated beside at a dinner once. He didn't recognize her, and he certainly didn't recognize Roman, Beals, because Roman didn't exist in his world and had no desire to. Adrian was back at his small round table near the window. He held a fresh whiskey. Camille was at his side now. Beals. She was whispering something into his ear, her voice low, but he wasn't hearing a word. He was just staring down into his drink, his brow furrowed over nothing at all. Vivian paused about 10 feet from them. She just waited. It took maybe 4 seconds. Beals. He felt her there. People can feel people. He raised his head, his eyes finding hers across those 10 feet, and this time they didn't slide away. The color drained from his face, a wave of white washing down from the top. She watched it happen. Beals. The forehead went first, then his cheeks, then his jawline. By the time the blood left his mouth, his lips were already parted. Beside him, Camille followed his stare, confused. He whispered something, so quiet she could barely catch it. No. Hello. Beals, Adrian. No. Camille said, Adrian, what is it? No. Beals. He stumbled back a step. His hip knocked against the table. The whiskey glass tilted but didn't spill. A stranger's hand shot out, an automatic reflex, and steadied it. Adrian was oblivious. He was just looking at Vivian. His mouth was still hanging open. Beals. Vivian, he breathed. Yes, Vivian. Yes, Adrian. It's you. He didn't seem capable of completing a thought. His face was doing something she'd never witnessed in 11 years of marriage. Beals. It was cycling through expressions like a slot machine, clicking through symbols, one after another, with none of them landing. Camille, always quicker than her husband, turned and finally gave Vivian a proper look. She took all of her in. Beals. Then she took in Roman standing behind her. Something hardened her words Camille's expression. I'm sorry. We have, Vivian replied. I don't. Camille. Vivian's tone was perfectly level. We met at a party once. Beals. You were in a red dress. You said you'd heard so much about me, and I told you I hoped my husband would be everything to you that he had been to me. There was a beat of silence. An ugly color crept into Camille's face. Vivian, Camille whispered. Yeah. Beals. Oh my, yes. Camille instinctively took a step away from Adrian, a small retreat that Vivian knew. Even then, she would savor later. A tiny detail of private victory. Even in that moment, Camille knew to get her body clear of his feels. Adrian finally managed to find a word. Where? He asked. Where have you been, Vivian? He cleared his throat. Where have you been? He said it with such absurdity, like a husband chiding a wife for being late from the market. Feels, as if he still had that right. His voice broke on the last word. Vivian didn't reply. She just held his gaze for a long time. She looked at him in the way she had learned to look at men over the last 3.5 years. The way Roman looked at men, feels. Really, a skill she'd absorbed from him without trying. Calm, complete, a slow appraisal. The kind of look you give an object you're considering, just before you decide against the purchase. Feels. This is my husband, Roman Versietti. Adrian's gaze shifted slowly as if it pained him toward Roman. Roman made no move to offer a hand. Roman said nothing. Feels. Roman looked at Adrian Cole the same way he looked at any man he didn't respect. Like a piece of furniture he was contemplating having hauled out of the room. We just wanted to introduce ourselves, Vivian continued, before the night was over. Feels. Because I have a feeling there are things going on in your business right now that you don't quite grasp yet, and I thought it might be kinder for you to have a face to put to it. Adrian's mouth moved, but no sound came out. You, he finally managed. Me, Feels. You did this. I didn't do a thing, Adrian. Feels. I didn't have to. You handled it all yourself. I just made sure that the people who had been choosing for a very long time not to see what you'd done finally started to look. That's all it was. I made a few calls. Roman made a few calls. Feels. Sophia? You wouldn't know Sophia. Sophia made a few calls, and the room where your empire was once standing, it's been emptying out for 3 weeks now, Adrian. Because when people take a proper look at you, which nobody has in a very long time, Feels, it turns out there's nothing really there. Vivian, I'm not finished. He shut his mouth. I'm not here to destroy you, she told him. You already destroyed yourself. I'm here because I needed you to know it was me. Feels. I needed you to know that the woman you pulled onto a stage and shamed in front of 300 people, the woman you told the world just wanted different things. That woman didn't die, Adrian. Feels. She didn't vanish. She didn't crawl into a corner and make herself small. She became somebody else. She became this. And what she has now, Feels, and who she has with her now, it is so far beyond anything you could have ever offered her that it's almost funny, Adrian, that you ever believed you were the best she could do. His eyes welled up with tears. That didn't move her. Feels. The lack of feeling surprised her. She'd thought during all the planning that if he cried, she would feel some echo of it. She felt nothing. She felt the way you feel when a hurricane you've been dreading is downgraded to just a bit of wind. Vivian, Feels, he pleaded, please, no. You don't understand. The business, the accounts, I understand perfectly. Feels. If we could just talk. Adrian, look at me. He did. I have no desire to talk. I don't want an apology. I don't want a single piece of what you built. I don't need it. What you had was never as grand as you imagined. Feels. And what I have now is more than I ever dreamed was possible. I came tonight for a single reason. I wanted you to see my face. Feels. And I wanted you to understand that every terrible thing that happens to you from this moment on, every phone call that goes unreturned, every loan that's called in, every article that gets published, Feels, every friend who is suddenly unavailable, I wanted you to understand that none of it is just bad luck. It's an audit. Feels. It is a ledger finally being balanced. It is a debt you never even knew you had, and I am here to collect. She let the words hang in the air between them. She let them settle. That's all, she said. That is everything I came here to say. Feels. Adrian's mouth opened again. Very quietly, Roman said Vivian. She turned her head. Yes, is that everything? That's everything. Are you sure? I'm sure, he offered her his arm. She took it. They walked out of the ballroom. They didn't rush. Feels. They moved just as they had come in, along the edges of the room, past the senator who still had no idea who she was, past a woman in a gold dress, past the bar. Behind them, at the small round table by the window, Feels. A man who used to be Adrian Cole collapsed into a chair that a kind stranger pushed beneath him, and his new wife stood a careful foot away, not touching him, and the low hum of the ballroom slowly rose to fill the space he left behind. Feels, the way ballrooms do, because the crowd hadn't witnessed it. They hadn't seen a thing. At most, they saw a woman in a red dress leaning close to a couple by the window, murmuring something quiet. Just another Tuesday at these kinds of parties. Later in the car, Feels. Cutting through the cold streets of a city that used to be hers, Vivian rested her head on Roman's shoulder. She said nothing for a very long time. And then so softly, I thought I would feel something. You don't? I feel a little lighter. That's all. Feels. I thought I would feel, I don't know what I thought. You thought it would be bigger. Yes, I thought it would be bigger. Roman was quiet for a moment. The car slid through a yellow light. Feels. The driver, unprompted, turned the heat up. It's just 2 clicks. It was bigger for him, Roman said. Yes, and that's enough. Yes, she let her eyes fall shut. She didn't know it yet. Not there, leaning into her husband in the back of a car. Feels. In a city she was about to leave behind for good, that the hardest fight of her life was not behind her, that it was never Adrian Cole, that it wasn't the ballroom. She didn't know that the real fight had been sitting beside her the entire ride home. Feels. His hand resting on hers, saying almost nothing at all, just watching a skyline that had bled red behind the buildings while they were inside. No, she didn't know that yet. Feels. She would know in 6 weeks. The flight home was silent. Roman slept, something he almost never did on a plane. Vivian just watched him. A softness found his face when he slept, a vulnerability that vanished the moment he was awake. Feels. And she stared at it for a long, long time, trying to figure out why. In the quiet aftermath of getting the one thing she'd wanted for 4 years, she felt nothing but unsettled. She was promised peace. Feels. What she got instead was the feeling of walking down a long corridor, only to find the door at the end wasn't the final door at all. They touched down at 4 in the morning, local time. The driver was waiting at the gate. Feels. The house on the cliff was a shadow when they pulled up. Feels. Roman brought her bag in. He always did, and he made her tea because she always wanted it after a long flight. And then he just said, I'm going to bed, and he went. But she sat on the porch. The stars were out. The ocean was a roar. Feels. She drank her tea until it turned cold in her hands, and then she kept holding the cup, letting the chill of it give her something to anchor to. She tried to picture what Adrian Cole was doing, in his house 4,000 miles away. She couldn't. Feels. And she realized she didn't care. That was the part that truly shocked her. For 4 years she had obsessed over the shape of his humiliation, and now that she'd finally served it to him, he just went back to being what he always was. A small, Feels, loud man in a tuxedo that was a little too tight, in a city she didn't even live in. Feels. Not a villain, not some mountain to be conquered, just a man. It turned out she was going to be fine about Adrian Cole. What she wasn't going to be fine about was everything that came next. The first crack appeared 2 weeks after they returned. Feels. It was a Tuesday. Roman didn't come home for dinner. That by itself wasn't strange. Roman sometimes didn't come home for dinner. They had an arrangement. She didn't ask where he'd been. He didn't say. And for nearly 3 years, Feels, this understanding had worked. She'd built a life on its foundation. She told herself again and again this is what she signed up for. Eyes wide open. No surprises. Feels. But that Tuesday, at 11:30 at night, he came in through the kitchen door and left the light off. She heard him go to the sink. She heard him wash his hands for a very long time. The water ran and ran. Then it stopped. Feels. And then she heard him start washing them all over again. She got out of bed and stood in the doorway. Roman. He flinched at her voice, just a little. He didn't turn around. You're awake. I was reading. What are you doing? Washing my hands. Feels. For 20 minutes? It hasn't been 20 minutes. It has, actually. I've been listening. He was silent for a long moment. He shut off the water. He just stood there, his back to her, his hands dripping onto the mat. I'm fine, Viv. Feels. Is somebody dead? No. Is somebody hurt? No. Then why are you washing your hands like, Viv, please? She stopped. He'd used her name, the short one, the name he saved for when he was exhausted, or when he was trying to get her to let something go. Feels. And his voice held something she'd never heard before. Not anger. She could have handled anger. This was something closer to shame, and Roman Vercetti did not do shame. 2 years ago, Roman Vercetti had told her, quite calmly, Feels, that shame was just an excuse men used to avoid looking at what they'd done. And he didn't believe in looking away. He believed in doing the thing and then carrying the weight of it. Feels. That, he'd said, was the difference between a man and a child. But that Tuesday night, he had the voice of a child. Didn't push it. She just said, come to bed when you can. And she went back to their room, and she didn't sleep. At 4 in the morning, Feels, he still hadn't come. She went out to the living room, and there he was, on the couch. Still dressed, not sleeping, just staring up at the ceiling. She took the chair across from him. Tell me, she said. He didn't look at her. It's nothing you need to carry. Feels. Roman, Vivian, I'm your wife. I run half your accounts. Last month, I sat beside you in a car while you helped me destroy a man. Don't you dare insult me by deciding what I can and can't carry." He closed his eyes. "Feels. Fine," he said. "Fine? Fine, I'll tell you. But not tonight. Tomorrow, after I get some sleep. I'll tell you tomorrow." He didn't tell her the next day, or the day after that. He didn't tell her for the rest of the week. Whatever it was, Feels, he carried it with him like a heavy stone in his pocket, and she watched him carry it. She didn't ask again. She knew asking never worked with Roman. She'd learned that lesson in their first year together. And because some small ancient part of her, Feels, a part that had survived Adrian Cole and Teresa's kitchen and Abrielle's apartment, was whispering to her very quietly, "Wait, wait, it's coming to you. Don't chase it. Wait." It came on a Saturday afternoon, a detail she would, much later, find almost funny. Feels. Not in the dead of night. Not in a screaming crisis. Not after some frantic phone call. It came on a Saturday afternoon in the kitchen, while she was chopping onions and he was sitting at the island, just drinking a glass of water. Feels. It came because she asked him a simple question, a domestic question, about a weekend plan. She asked if his cousin Matteo was coming to stay in November, because Matteo always stayed in November. He had stayed in November every single year she'd known Roman. Feels. Roman looked at her, the water glass halfway to his lips. He slowly set it down. "Matteo's not going to be coming in November," he said. "Why not?" "He's just not coming, Viv. Not in November, not ever." She placed the knife down on the cutting board. Feels. "What happened to Matteo? He's alive, he's fine. Roman just exhaled." Feels. "He's not coming, Viv. I need you to sit down for this." She sat. He didn't speak right away. He just stared at his hands for a long time. He looked at the wedding band on his left hand, the one she'd put there almost 3 years ago in a judge's office. Feels. He turned it once, and then he said so quietly, like a man confessing to a priest he no longer believes in, "Do you remember the night at the restaurant? The first time you and I really worked together? That August." Feels. "You came in at 2 in the morning to do the books, and there was blood on my shirt." "Yes." "Do you remember I never told you what happened?" "Yes." "You never asked." "No. I loved you for that. I need you to know that. I think I fell in love with you that night." Feels. "Because you didn't ask. Because you just sat across from me and you did the work and you didn't ask." Feels. "You didn't know it then, but you were doing the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for me." He paused. "Roman, I'm going to tell you what happened that night. I'm telling you because I should have told you 3 years ago. And because I didn't." Feels. "And the reason I didn't is the same reason I was washing my hands for 20 minutes the other night. Are you ready?" And so he told her. It took him nearly an hour. He didn't sugarcoat a single word. Feels. He told her about a young woman who had worked for one of his operations in a way she didn't fully understand. Not one of the businesses listed on the 3rd page of that folder he'd slid across Abrielle's desk 4 years ago. Not narcotics. Feels. Not trafficking. Nothing that broke his 4 rules. This was a gray operation, the kind he'd described in vague terms but never in specifics. This young woman, her name was Elena. She was 24 years old, and in the course of her work, Feels, she came to learn things she was never supposed to know. Elena never sold those secrets to anyone. That was the first thing Roman said about her, and he said it twice. As far as anyone could tell, Elena had done nothing wrong. Elena had, however, Feels, started talking about leaving. She was in love with a young man who had no idea what she really did for a living. She wanted, as she told another woman on his staff, out. Feels. She wanted a new beginning. She wanted to vanish. But a man in Roman's service, a man named Luca, with him since they were just 18, had his own ideas. This was the same Luca who, back in 2014, Feels, had caught a slug meant for Roman in some forgotten parking lot, and he decided, all on his own, that a young woman who wanted to walk away from Roman Versetti's world was a loose end that couldn't be left to fray. So Luca handled it. Feels. The night Vivian came to the restaurant, the night she did the books, the stain on Roman's cuff, it wasn't Elena's blood, it was Luca's. Because when Roman found out, and he found out that same night he went to that restaurant, Feels, waited in the darkness of the back alley, and beat the man he had called a brother with his bare hands until he was almost a ghost. Almost, but not quite. Feels. Close enough for 6 weeks in a discreet hospital, followed by a one-way ticket out of the country on terms they both understood. Never return. But the girl, Elena, she was still gone. And Roman, the man with rules, a man who didn't touch trafficking, Feels, or children, or narcotics, he hadn't been the one to kill her. He hadn't given the order. In fact, when he learned the truth, he nearly destroyed the one who had. But Roman built the engine Luca was a part of. Roman hired him, and for 20 years, Roman banked on Luca's judgment, and in the silent, honest hours of the night, Roman Vercetti knew there was no real line in the sand between the man who decided Elena had to die and the man who built and profited from the very world where a man feels like Luca could make that kind of call without ever asking. That was the ghost, the truth he carried into the restaurant that night. The same one he brought to their marriage 3 years later, as they sat at an iron table on a cliffside porch. I should have told you, he finally said. Yes, I didn't, because I was afraid that if I told you, you'd look at me differently. And how you were looking at me then, Vivian, no one had ever looked at me like that. Not once. I was 42 years old and I had never been seen as a man. I was a position, a role. Everyone saw the function, even Sophia, who loves me. She sees a function. You saw a man, and I couldn't bring myself to say the one thing that would make that go away. So you didn't. Oh, I didn't. And tonight, his voice trailed off. He dragged a hand down his face. Tonight, I washed my hands for a very long time. Because something happened. Different city, different man, not the same thing. Not at all. But it was close enough. Close enough that I was standing in an alley 2 nights ago, looking at this man, and the first thought that came into my head was, Luca would have handled this. And in that moment, I realized I'd had that exact thought 1,000 times these last 5 years, and I never once let myself notice. So I washed my hands. What happened in the alley? I let him go, the man. I let him go. Told him he had until morning to be gone from this city. He'll be gone. And it isn't enough, Viv. I know it's not enough. But it was the first time I did something that wasn't what Luca would have done. And now I'm trying to see who I am if I'm not the man who does what Luca would have done. She was quiet for a very long time. She rose, moved to the stove, and switched off the burner under an empty pot that had been heating nothing the entire time he spoke. She set the pot on a cold grate, returned to her seat across from him. She felt the distant, familiar rhythm of her own heart, a pattern she knew all too well. It was the same beat she'd felt in the hall outside the powder room at the Briarcliff estate 4.5 years ago, the moment she heard a man she loved whisper baby through a wall to a woman who wasn't her. A different knife, but the same heart. Roman. Yes, I have to ask you something, and I need the truth. Because if you lie to me now about this, I'll know. And there's no coming back from that. Ask. In our 3 years, all of it, every deal, every trip, every single night you came home and told me things were fine. Has there been another Elena? He shut his eyes. No, Roman. No, Viv, no. I swear to you, I have been so careful. I was careful before we were married. And I became a different kind of careful after. I never wanted to be looking at you across a table like this ever again. I knew from that night at the restaurant what you were capable of carrying, but I also knew what you should never have to. I have not asked you to carry another Elena. I wouldn't. The man in the alley, it wasn't an Elena. It was a man who did something to a woman on my staff. He'll be out of the city by morning because I allowed it. 5 years ago, he'd be in the ocean. That's the entire story. She just sat with it. After a moment, she asked, why now? Why now what? Why tell me this now? You said you should have done it before, you didn't. So why now? Why now? He just looked at her. He held her gaze for so long she thought the question would hang there between them forever. Because of what you did in that ballroom, he said at last. I don't understand. Viv, I watched you. I watched you walk up to that man, look him in the eye, and tell him exactly what he was. You did it without raising your voice. You did it without an ounce of cruelty. You just told him the simple truth of his actions and what they cost him. And then you let him go. You didn't shatter him. You let him shatter himself. And when you walked out of that room in the car, you said you felt lighter. I did. I have been carrying something, Viv. For years, something huge. I've been carrying it, unable to set it down, and I built my whole life around the weight of it. Then I watched you put down something you'd carried for almost 4 years. You did it in 90 seconds, and you did it without rage. And watching you, I understood. I'd been wrong about what strength was. I thought strength was how much you could carry. You showed me strength as the ability to put it down. Roman, let me finish. Please, I'm nearly done. She nodded. I didn't tell you about Elena because I was terrified you would leave me. I'm telling you now because you deserve to know who you married. You deserve the information to choose if you want to stay married to him. That is the bare minimum, feels. That is the absolute least of what you are owed, and for 3 years I have given you less. I am sorry, Viv, I am so, so sorry. He laid his hands flat on the island between them. He made no move toward her. He didn't ask for her forgiveness. He didn't, feels. She would later realize, even ask her to stay. She got up. She walked out of the kitchen and went upstairs into their bedroom. She closed the door, but she didn't lock it. She just sat on the edge of the bed and covered her face with her hands. Feels. There were no tears. It had been a long time since she'd cried, and she wasn't about to start now. What she did instead was far more difficult. Feels. She sat in the silence of that room, and for a few minutes she allowed herself the clean, sharp burn of fury. She was furious at him for the lie. Furious that he let her walk into a marriage so blind. Feels. Furious that for 3 years he'd made her the woman who could say, "My husband isn't like the others." When in truth, her husband was exactly like the others. He was just disciplined enough to keep the bodies out of her line of sight. For a moment, feels. She was furious that he'd ruined the porch. She loved that porch. It was the place she had chosen him. Now, Elena was on the porch. Elena was at the iron table. Elena was in the memory of his hand, open on its surface. Feels. She was also furious at herself, and this was the harder part. She forced herself to sit with it, refusing to be a woman who lied to herself, because she had known. Not the names, not Elena, not Luca, not the blood on his shirt. But she had known. Feels. Known in that deep down way you know something when you are actively trying not to. You don't get to be Roman Versetti without a cost. A cost paid by someone, somewhere, and she had signed the contract. Sophia had warned her. Abrielle had warned her. Feels. Roman himself had laid it out for her. Feels. And she had said yes. Yes, because she was drowning, and he was the shore. She had her own ledger. But her own complicity in the shape of their life didn't absolve him of hiding the specific price. And sitting there on the edge of their bed, feels, she decided she did not owe him the mercy of pretending it did. She went back downstairs. He was in the same spot at the island, a statue. 2 hours maybe had passed. The light in the room had softened. Roman, yes, I'm not leaving you, feels. His face remained a mask, but she saw the tension bleed from his shoulders. But I'm not telling you this is okay. I wouldn't expect you to. I have things to say. You are going to listen. And if you interrupt me even once, feels, I will go back upstairs and I will not come down until morning. Feels. All right, just sit down. He was, of course, already seated. He simply shifted his weight, a man settling into the gravity of his own judgment. She remained standing before him, a pillar in the wreckage. She would not sit. 1. You got it wrong, she said. Feels. The reason you kept this from me. You claimed it was because you feared I would leave. That's a half-truth at best. The other half, the real half, is that you couldn't stand the thought of seeing yourself reflected in my eyes. You craved my gaze, Roman, feels, but only on the version of you that you approved for viewing. That is vanity. That is the deepest strain of vanity in you, and until this very night, I never knew it existed, and that feels worse than the lie. The lie I can almost understand. Feels. But this vanity, I'm going to need some time with that one, he said nothing. 2. Feels. There will never be another conversation like this one. And I don't just mean you shouldn't do things that force these talks to happen. I mean that if, 5 years from this moment, you find yourself sitting at this very island with another story you buried, feels, another truth you kept from me, I will walk out that door and I will never ever walk back in. I'm telling you this now, so it's fair. So you know. This is the only one of these I have in me. The very next one is the end of us. Do you understand? I understand. Feels. 3. Luca. Yes, he's no longer in the country. He's gone and he's not coming back. The message was delivered with absolute clarity. His wife is with him. He's alive. Feels. That was more mercy than he deserved. And I know it was less than his wife would have begged for if she had any idea what I was orchestrating that night. I carry both of those truths. You will never tell me where he is. No, I won't. Good. Feels. I don't want that knowledge. But you need to promise me, Roman. Promise me that if I ever ask you again, tonight, tomorrow, or 12 years into our future for any reason, if something has happened inside your organization, if there's another Elena, feels, if there is anything at all that I ought to know, you will tell me, without me having to bleed it out of you, without this agonizing 2-week wait while you find your courage. Promise me. I promise. Say the words. I promise, Vivian, feels. I will tell you without you even having to ask. If something like that ever happens again, I will tell you within a week. Right here, in this kitchen, feels. I will sit exactly where I'm sitting now, and I will tell you. You have my word. 4. Her voice frayed then for the very first time in this whole exchange, and she let it break. She didn't try to conceal it. He deserved to see what this cost her. 4 deals. That thing you said about being looked at like a man. I need you to hear me on this, because it's the thing that makes me the most furious. And if I don't say it out loud, it will curdle inside me for the rest of our marriage, and I'll never know why. Deals. You do not get to use my perception of you as an excuse to hide yourself from me. You just don't. I looked at you like a man, because you were a man standing in front of me, not because I was blind to what that meant. I was not blind. Deals. I knew exactly what I was marrying. I didn't know the name Elena, and I didn't know the brutal detail of the shirt, and that failure is yours alone. But I knew, Roman. I knew the general shape of your world. Deals. And if you had told me the specific story of Elena within that general knowledge, if you had sat me down on our porch 3.5 years ago and just said, Vivian, a young woman named Elena was killed by someone who worked for me. Deals. I've been carrying it ever since. I didn't give the order, but I built the very room where it was allowed to happen. Do you have any idea what I would have done? No. I would have married you anyway. I probably would have married you sooner. Deals. Because I would have known I was marrying a man who could bear the weight of a thing like that and still tell the truth about it. Instead, I married a man who could bear the weight and then lie about it for 3 years. Those are 2 entirely different men. Deals. Roman. Deals. The one I thought I was choosing and the one I actually got. Deals. And my anger isn't that you have an Elena in your past. My anger is that you presented me with a different husband than the one I would have chosen for myself. He drew in a long, slow breath. I understand, he said. And then so quietly it was almost lost. Deals. You are right. I know I'm right. You are right, and I have no idea how to fix 3 years of this. You don't fix them. You don't get to. You lived them. They are a fact. What you do from this moment forward, Deals, is you stop trying to be the man I thought you were, and you start being the man I would have actually chosen. And you do that in 1,000 small ways every single day for a very long time without ever expecting me to notice. And then one day, years from now, Deals, I will notice, and I will be the one to tell you. Deals. But you don't get to ask me when that day will be. You don't get to check on the status of my forgiveness. You will not treat this like some wound you can just patch up with a bouquet of flowers. You will do the work quietly, Deals, the exact same way you do everything else you truly care about. Do you understand me? Yes, say it. I'll do the work quietly. I won't ask. I won't check in. I won't expect a thing. I will do it because it's the right way to be your husband. Deals. Not because it earns me some prize. Yes, yes, good. She finally sank onto the stool across from him. Her legs were trembling, just slightly, though not a single tear had fallen and her voice had never risen. It was her body, Deals, finally processing the adrenaline of a battle she hadn't, technically, even fought. Deals. He saw her legs shaking. He placed his hand on the island between them, palm facing up. She said, "One more thing, not yet," she said. "Elena's family. What about them? Do they know what happened to her?" Deals. Do they have a body? Do they have anything? Roman was silent for a long moment. They have a body, he said. They were told she was in an accident on a stretch of highway where accidents are common. They have a grave. I paid for it, Deals, through untraceable channels. And every year on her birthday, I deposit money into an account in her mother's name. The mother thinks it's a survivor's benefit from the company Elena was officially employed by, which is a legitimate business of mine, Deals, and which, by any fair reading of the fine print, did owe her mother that money. Deals. Her mother has never heard my name. Her mother has no idea it's me. Why do you pay? Because I built the room. That isn't enough, Roman. I know it isn't. No, I mean, it's a gesture. It's not nothing, but it falls so far short. Deals. She has a mother who is unaware her daughter was murdered. She believes it was a tragic accident. In some ways, that's so much worse than knowing the truth. For 5 years, she has been mourning an accident. Deals. She has not been allowed the grief she actually earned. She has been given the wrong grief. Viv, I'm not suggesting you tell her. I don't know if telling her is the right thing to do, Deals. I have no idea if it makes things better or if it just shatters her world all over again. I don't have the answer, Roman, and I will not pretend I do, just because one answer is more convenient than the other, Deals. But what I am telling you is that you, at some point in the life you plan to have with me, are going to have to truly sit with that. Not just the grave you paid for, not just the anonymous money. The mother, Deals. You are going to have to carry her mother in your mind for the rest of your days. And now, because you told me, So will I, yes. That is it, Roman. That is what you have given me. By telling me, you haven't unburdened yourself. Heels. You have simply divided your burden by two. For people like us who don't believe in confessionals, that's all it is. A division problem. And I am saying yes. I am saying yes to my half of the equation, because I love you, Heels. But I need you to understand exactly what it is I am saying yes to. He looked at her. Heels. His eyes were wet. This wasn't a performance. It wasn't the way Adrian had cried in that ballroom. This was quiet, private. The way a man cries in his own kitchen at the close of a Saturday afternoon. I know what you're saying yes to, he said. I know you know. Heels. I love you. I know. I thought I was going to lose you tonight. No, you weren't. I felt like I was. You weren't going to lose me tonight. You were going to lose me on the first Saturday afternoon of the rest of our lives, the next time you did it again. Heels. By telling me, Roman, you saved yourself. That's what I've been trying to make you see. I'm not afraid of the Elena in your past. I am terrified of the man who was incapable of telling me about her. Heels. That man, he's the one you need to get rid of. Not for my sake, for yours. He reached his hand across the island. He didn't try to take hers. He just pressed his forehead down against her hand where it rested on the cool wood. Heels. And he stayed there for a very long time. She let him. After a moment, she lifted her other hand and placed it on the back of his head, holding him there. Her palm could feel the dusting of gray at his temples. Okay, she said, her voice a near whisper. Okay, Heels. Outside, the light on the water had deepened to a bruised red. The kitchen, with no lamps yet lit, was slowly filling with shadows. He lifted his head. Viv, yes, I need to ask you something. Yes, not now, not tonight. Heels. In a few days, I need to ask you about how we do the work from here. About what I should be doing differently. About the organization. I've actually been thinking about it for months. Since before the ballroom. I don't want to ask you tonight. Heels. You deserve a night of not being asked for anything. But in a few days, I want to sit with you, and I want to make some choices, and I need you to help me make them. Will you do that? Yes. Okay. Roman. Yes. What kind of decisions? Big ones. Structural. Heels. Things I should have come to you with a long time ago. I want to take some things out of the business. I want to close some rooms. Heels. Can you do that? I don't know. I think so. I've been mapping it out. Some of it will be dangerous in the short term. There are people who have money tied up in those rooms. But some of it, I think I can do it. Okay. She held his gaze. Roman. Yes. Heels. We'll talk in a few days. But I need you to know something before we do. I did not marry you to change you. I need you to really hear this. I am not sitting here tonight telling you that closing those rooms is the price of keeping me. Heels. That is not what this is about. I never asked you to close a single room when you proposed to me. Heels. When we married, I never asked you to shut down any rooms. I'm not asking you now. If you do it, it's because you want to, not for me. Understand? I understand. I'm serious, Roman. This matters. If these rooms close for my sake, you'll end up hating me for it. Heels. I've already had one husband hate me for things I never chose. I won't have another. I understand. Good, Viv. Yes, I'm not doing it for you. I've been thinking about this for months. I didn't have the guts. Yes. Well, she said. Heels. Her voice soft. You have them now. I have them now. Good. And they just sat there, across from each other in the gathering darkness of the kitchen. Heels. Outside, beyond that porch, the ocean just kept on with its business, the same business it had been conducting long before either of them had ever drawn a breath. After a time, she reached a hand across the island and found his. He held it. Heels. This wasn't the end of the hard road. It was only the beginning. They would fight again. Once, that very week, over something small and pointless that had nothing to do with any of this. Then again, 2 months later, Heels. Over something huge that had everything to do with it. And a year after that, they'd fight over whether the man who went into a certain kind of meeting would be the same one who came home, and if she could live in that space between. Heels. They were going to learn, the hard way, how to be married as the people they were, not the people they pretended to be. Heels. But on that Saturday, in that kitchen, while the water in the bay bled from red to pitch black, Vivian Versetti held her husband's hand in the fading light, and she knew. Heels. The thing she had walked back into that ballroom to face was not the hardest thing she would ever have to face with a man. No. The hardest thing was sitting right across from her, and as it turned out, she wasn't afraid of it. Heels. The talk they had a few days later didn't happen in the kitchen. Roman took her out on the water. They said nothing for the first hour. It was a small boat. Roman never saw the point in big ones. Heels. He always figured big boats were for men who needed the world to see them owning big boats. The water was calm, the way it gets in late October, a still, flat sheet somewhere between the color of pewter and green. He steered. Eels. She sat in the back with a coffee thermos, watching the cliffs shrink away behind them. Eventually he killed the engine and they started to drift. She understood then this was how it had to be done. I wrote some of it down, he said. You wrote things down? Eels. I don't write things down. You know that. I know. But I wrote these down because I was afraid I'd start talking and talk myself into a softer version of what I mean. He passed her 3 pages, torn from the legal pad he kept in his office. Eels. His handwriting was just as she knew it, small, squared off. She took the pages and read them in silence as the boat gently rocked. A gull swooped near the rail, then veered away. She read all 3 pages through twice before she finally looked up. Roman? Eels. Yes, this is a lot. I know. This isn't just closing a few rooms. This is taking a sledgehammer to the walls. Some of them. The 4 rules are still the 4 rules. Shipping stays for now. Real estate stays. Restaurants stay. Eels. Security contracts stay. But the gray rooms, the loan rooms, the arbitration rooms, those 3 operations down south I've spent 5 years telling myself were under control. Eels. I want to close them. Not all at once. 6 months. 18 months for one of them. But I want to begin this week. Roman, do you have any idea what happens if you move this fast? I know exactly what happens. That's why I wrote it down. Eels. I need you to read what I wrote, and I need you to tell me where I'm being an idiot. She read the pages a 3rd time. She wasn't that woman in the office above the hat factory anymore. The one who found a tiny error in some merino invoices. Eels. 4 years had forged her into something else entirely. A woman who could read an operational plan like a novel, who could see on a 3-page outline every place a man had told himself a convenient lie. Eels. She found 2 spots on page 2 where Roman was being wildly optimistic about how a certain crew would react to getting cut loose. She found another on page 3, where he was lowballing a liability she herself had flagged in Sophia's books 11 months ago. Eels. She told him what she saw. He listened. Okay, he said when she finished. I agree on the 3rd one. I need to push back. I think you're being cautious where I need you to be ruthless. Fine, push back. So he did. Eels. They argued for 20 minutes right there on the boat, about the details of an exposure that means nothing now. She won 2 points. He won 1. In the end, she folded the pages and slipped them back into his coat. Eels. All right, she said. All right, Roman. You do this. I'll handle the books. I'll be right there next to you when you tell Sophia. I'll sit beside you when you tell the other 3 who have to hear it from you. But I'm only going to say this once, Eels. Just like I said in the kitchen. If you're doing any of this because you think it earns you something from me, you and I are going to have a serious problem. It buys you nothing. I'm already here. I was here before you wrote a single word on those pages. Eels. And I'll be here if you decide to rip them up tonight. Are we clear? We're clear. Say it. It doesn't buy me anything. You are already here. Good. He gave a single sharp nod. Eels. He stared out over the water. Yes. I can't stop thinking about Elena's mother. I know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do about her. I don't either. I thought you'd have the answer. Roman, I sleep beside you every night. Eels. I don't have answers for you that you don't already have yourself. I have the same facts you do. And yes, I've been thinking about it every single day. But here's what I keep coming back to. For 5 years, she has been grieving the wrong thing. That's a fact. Eels. And the real grief, the one she was owed, it has an address. And that address is you. If you're going to tell her, you have to do it with your own face. Not a lawyer, not a letter, not some anonymous payment. Eels. You don't get to ease your conscience with a stranger. If you do this, it is your face she will be looking at. She'll hate me. Yes, she will. She could call the police. She could. She might shoot me. She might do that too. What do I do then? Eels. You do not defend yourself. You do not run. You don't send your men to stand between her and her own rage. You just sit there. You let her do whatever she has to do. That is the only shape this can take, Roman. It's the only shape that is fair to her. Eels. And if you can't do that, if you can't sit in her kitchen and let her scream at you or call the cops or hit you across the face, then you never tell her. And you carry that lie until the day you die. Eels. And you don't ever pretend like the men in your world do that carrying it is some noble burden. It's just a lie you kept safe. Those are your only 2 choices, and I will not make this one for you. He was silent for a very long time. I'm going to tell her. Eels, he finally said. Okay, not this month. I have to get the closings underway first. The others, they can't know I'm going to her until it's done. It would look like weakness, a different kind of weakness. It would put other people in danger. I understand, Eels. But within a year. I'll go within the year. Alone, Roman? Viv, I will not ask my wife to sit in a room while another woman finds out I'm the reason her daughter is dead. That's the bare minimum of decency. Eels. You gave me that decency. In the kitchen, the night I told you about the ballroom. You gave me a room with no one else in it. I'm giving her the same. She didn't argue. That, she would realize later, was something she'd learned about being his wife. Eels. There were times to push because she was right, and there were times to be still because he was. Roman's closings took 14 months. They were bloody. Eels. A really bad week hit in February when an old man in another city, a name from the first page of that folder Roman slid to Abriel years ago, a name Vivian had only ever called the friend in her notes, decided Roman was making a mistake. Eels. A mistake that would make him unpredictable, and unpredictable was bad for everyone's money. Eels. The friend started making calls. He made 2 to men on Roman's payroll. Both men went to Roman first, a fact Sophia later pointed to as the clearest sign of how much Roman's world had changed. 5 years ago, she'd said, Eels. At least one of them would have sided with the friend, not with Roman. So Roman went to see the friend himself. Vivian didn't go. She waited at the house on the cliff for 3 days. She didn't sleep much. Sophia came and took the guest room. Eels. They played cards at the kitchen island until 2 in the morning every night, and they never once talked about where Roman was. Because there was nothing to say. Eels. He came home on the 4th day. He had a fresh cut over his eyebrow, but no other signs of damage. He said the friend had, with some reluctance, agreed to back off. And in the middle of their conversation, Eels. The friend had said a few things that reminded Roman precisely why he was shutting down the rooms in the first place. What things? Vivian asked. He told me I was going soft because of a woman. Oh, Eels. And I told him I was going soft because I had finally found a woman worth being soft in front of. And if that was what going soft meant, then every man he'd ever looked up to had been soft at some point in his life. Eels. They just had the good sense not to admit it to his face. Eels. And what were his words? He told me I'd always run my mouth. Then he poured me a drink, and he spun this story, one I'd never heard before, about his first wife, the one who passed in 1987. When he finished, Eels, he just looked at me and said I should go home to you. That if he caught wind of me making a single wrong play with the parts of the business I was holding on to, he'd take them from me. So I told him I'd have to earn it then, day after day. He just said, Eels, you'd better, and I walked out. Roman? Yeah. Is he going to take them? No, he's not going to take them from me. The man's almost 80. He just had to get the words out so he could finally get some sleep. And she knew he was right. By that point, Eels, she had learned to read his face, to see the space between the things he said because they were true, and the things he said because he so desperately needed them to be. Eels. That was the first kind of truth. Then 6 months later, on a cold Tuesday in the fading light of spring, Roman drove his car, alone, for 600 miles, north. Eels. He sat in a kitchen with a woman named Adriana Rosales, Alina's mother, and he told her what became of her daughter. He was inside that kitchen for nearly 3 hours. When he called Vivian, it was from the parking lot of some forgotten motel. His voice was raw, Eels, stripped bare. He wasn't crying, but you could hear the ghost of it, the place where tears had been and then had stopped. She didn't call the cops? Vivian asked. She didn't shoot me, he said. She hit me, twice, right across the face. And then she just, Eels, sat down, and she cried for a very long time, and I sat there, across from her, and I didn't move an inch. Eels. And after that, she started asking questions. For 2 hours, she asked, and I answered every single one. I didn't dress it up. I gave her what I knew. I told her what I didn't. I told her what I did to the man who was responsible, Eels. I told her what I had been doing with the money. But she didn't, Viv, she didn't forgive me. I need you to understand that. She never said she forgave me. What she said was she never wanted to lay eyes on me again, that I was to never make contact, Eels, and that the money I'd been sending, she wanted it put into a scholarship, in Elena's name. At the community college Elena attended for 1 semester before all of it, and she wants a report, every year, Eels, from a law firm, not from me, showing her where it all went. Eels. And then, he said, at the very end, as I was getting up to leave, she said, "Thank you for coming here. Thank you for making me real." I had no idea what she meant by that, and I didn't ask. It wasn't my place to ask. I just got in the car and I drove, feels, and now I'm calling you. Come home, she said. Okay, Roman, yes, you did the right thing. I'm telling you that this one time. I won't say it again, because I don't want you to be the kind of man who needs to hear he did the right thing, feels. But I'm saying it now just this once, because tonight, okay? Come home. And he did. They didn't live happily ever after. Of course not. Nobody ever does. In fact, feels. There was a stretch of time in the year that followed when Vivian simply came apart, feels. She never found a clean word for it, but looking back, she knew what it was. A delayed grief for the 11 years she'd lost being married to Adrian Cole. A sorrow she had held at bay for the better part of a decade, and which her own body, feels, without her consent, finally decided to collect. It arrived in waves. Some days she was stranded on the porch, unable to move. On others, a fury would rise in her, aimed at Roman for sins that were never his to own, feels. Simply because he was the husband standing there, while the one her rage was truly meant for had been sued into obscurity in a divorce and had vanished into a condo in some southern state, erased from the map of the city that was once her world, feels. And Roman, he never took the fury personally. That was the gift she would be grateful for more than almost anything. That when she was failing at being married to him, he never once made her pay for it. He would just make her coffee, feels. Sit on the other side of the porch, go for long walks. He let her find her way back to him when she was ready, and when she did come back, he never demanded an explanation. Then one morning, about 8 months into that awful time, she woke up, feels, and the anger was gone. She lay there in bed, testing the absence of it, like you'd probe a tooth that's been aching for weeks. She thought of Adrian. She thought of the ballroom. She thought of a champagne-colored dress left in an airport trash can. Feels. Nothing, just a dull ache the way an old fracture complains when the weather turns, but the fire was out. She got up. She went downstairs. Roman was at the kitchen island reading the paper. Hi, she said. He glanced up. Hi, I think I'm done. He never asked, feels. With what? He just knew. Okay, he said. I don't know if it's for good. It might come back sometimes, but for today I'm done. Okay. Don't say okay again. What do you want me to say? I don't know. Something, feels. He set the paper down and walked around the island. He cupped her face in his hands so carefully, the way he always did, and just looked at her for a long moment. I like you better than anybody, he said, and she laughed. Feels. The sound that came out of her was wrecked and loud and real. That's your something? It's what I've got, Viv. I don't have a big speech. I know you don't. It's the truth, though. I know it is. She just rested her forehead on his chest, feels, and he wrapped his arms around her. They stood that way in the quiet of the kitchen for a while. Then she went and made coffee, and he went back to his newspaper, and that was it. No soaring music, no fireworks, just a Thursday. 2 years after the fundraiser, feels, Vivian went to see her mother. She'd been in careful contact with her for nearly 18 months by then. The first time was a phone call. It lasted 4 minutes. Her mother cried and called her a terrible child, then said she loved her, then hung up, feels. The second call went for an hour, the third for 3. By the time Vivian got on a plane to Fort Lauderdale, they had been talking every Sunday for more than a year, her mother slowly getting to know this new version of her daughter in small pieces, feels. Her mother opened the door to the condo, studied her daughter for a long beat and said, You got skinny, Mom. You did. Skinny, get in here. I made way too much food. I knew I would, and I did it anyway. Roman was standing back on the walkway, feels. He hadn't wanted to intrude on the moment, even offered to wait in the car, but Vivian had said no. Her mother finally took him in, feels. Over a year of phone calls, her mother had pieced together her own version of Roman and opinions she'd largely kept to herself. You, her mother said, pointing. Me, Roman replied. You're older than you sounded on the phone. My apologies. Don't apologize, feels. It's fine. Come in. Shoes off. I've got slippers. He took off his shoes. He put on the slippers. They were clearly too small. He wore them for the next 4 hours without a single word of complaint, and her mother noticed. Later in the kitchen, drying a plate, feels. Her mother said to Vivian very quietly, All right, he's okay. Don't you dare tell him I said that. I won't. I had a whole speech prepared. I know you did. Well, I'm not giving it. Not today. Feels. Okay. They stayed for 4 days. On their final night, her mother and Roman sat out on the lanai drinking coffee, talking about something Vivian couldn't quite make out. When Vivian walked out to join them, her mother said, Don't hover, Vivian. Feels. We're fine. And Roman, not even looking up, added, Your mother is telling me about a man she dated in 1978 who sold her a stolen car. I'm going to hear how this ends. You're going to have to wait. So Vivian waited. Her mother, Eels, after all of it, lived for another 11 years. She visited them on the cliff twice a year for the rest of her life. She and Roman forged a friendship that Vivian never quite grasped and never tried to. Eels, one built mostly on gin rummy and a mutual disdain for a certain kind of TV news anchor. Eels. When her mother died, it was quiet, in her sleep in her own bed after a good day. And Roman was the one who flew down first because Vivian was stuck in a meeting she couldn't escape. He handled it all. The paperwork, the priest, the endless phone calls. Eels. When Vivian finally arrived at 2 in the morning, the apartment was clean. There was food on the counter. Her mother's favorite photograph was on the nightstand, turned towards the bed, just how she liked it. And Roman was sitting in a chair by the window. Eels. He stood up the moment she walked in, and he said nothing at all. He just held her for a very, very long time. That was years later. The business Roman had built morphed over the next decade into something he, Vivian, Eels, and Sophia could no longer define in a single sentence. Eels. A significant portion of it was, by any normal measure, legitimate. Another part operated in the gray areas, and a smaller, darker part with each passing year grew smaller still. Roman never made a show of becoming a clean man. Eels. He never wrote a book about it. He never gave a speech. He didn't parade his reform around because he wasn't reformed, not in the way people who like neat endings use that word. At 30, he had been a man who lived by a set of rules. At 45, Eels, he discovered his rules were not nearly as clean as he'd told himself. At 50, he started the long, patient work of making them stricter, and by 60, he had built a life his 18-year-old self would not have recognized. Eels, and would have probably dismissed as weak. He didn't care. Eels. He once confessed to Vivian that his 18-year-old self was just a boy, and a boy's opinion should never dictate how a man chooses to live his life. In the 6th year, he traveled alone to a gravesite in a town whose name he never shared with her, Eels. When he returned, all he offered was that he had gone, and she knew not to ask what words were spoken there. By then, she understood their marriage was a house with many rooms. She held the keys to some, while others remained locked, Eels, and the grace of their union was in never rattling the handles of doors she was not meant to open. For her own part, Vivian began to build. For the longest time, she had no desire for a thing of her own. Eels. The scars left from the Coal Hail years ran so deep that for nearly a decade, the thought of a company bearing her name left her feeling hollowed out and tired. Eels. But then, in that 6th year after the ballroom, Sophia, almost 70 and quietly, grudgingly, accepting the idea of stepping back, though she'd never call it retirement, looked across at her and said, "Vivian, you are being wasted, doing only what you do. Feels for this family. You have to claim something for yourself." "I don't want a company," Vivian replied. "I didn't say a company. I said a thing. Go make a thing. You have the money. You have the time, Feels. And you have a mind that is going to turn on itself if you don't give it something to chew on." So over the next 3 years, what Vivian created was a boutique consulting firm that specialized in, of all things, forensic accounting. Feels. It was the same meticulous work she'd done since Rhoda's dental practice, but now it was expanded, honed to a razor's edge, and given a name. She accepted the cases other firms wouldn't dare touch. She charged a fortune. She moved in silence. Her firm, Feels, which she named for the street where Teresa once lived, a reference lost on everyone in her field, which she never once clarified, became, inside of 5 years, the one people called when their deepest desire was to never see their name in the papers. Feels. She hired young women for the most part, and she paid them better than anyone else would. She forbade anyone from working past 6 o'clock. By every account from within those walls, she was a boss who demanded much and gave more. A woman who, Feels, if she took a liking to you, would shift mountains on your behalf, and if she did not, she would tell you precisely why, once, in private, and the subject would be closed forever. 11 years after the ballroom, Feels, a journalist sought her out for a long-form profile on what the pitch email called the quiet women running the parts of the economy no one is watching. Vivian's first instinct was to refuse. It was Roman who urged her to accept. Feels. "You've spent far too much of your life being invisible," he told her over breakfast. Feels. "You don't owe a soul your story, but you are allowed to have one." So she agreed. The profile was published, and the writer was good. The writer didn't unearth Vivian Hale, Feels. That piece of her existence was buried under mountains of paperwork, and enough time that only someone who already knew where to dig would ever find it. But what the journalist did capture, across 8,000 carefully chosen words, feels, was the precise shape of the woman Vivian had become. A photograph accompanied the piece. There she was in her office, wearing a simple gray sweater, no makeup, her hair cut short just as it had been since that day in Teresa's kitchen. She looked, feels, in that picture, like a woman in her late 40s who could not be fooled. A few men from her first life, her old life, saw that photograph, and one of them, a man named Adrian Cole, saw something familiar in the line of her jaw or the set of her shoulders. Feels. He reportedly spent the next several weeks making life miserable for everyone around him, and then, also reportedly, he just got over it. Feels. He had grown older, you see, and the scope of his obsessions had finally started to shrink. She knew none of this. She no longer kept tabs on him. It had been 8 years since she had even asked about him. Then one day, Feels, a year or so after the article came out, she was at a dinner party in a city far from home, and a woman she'd never met mentioned his name. Just in passing. Mentioned it like he was a minor player in an unimportant industry, which by then he was. Feels. And Vivian had a revelation, sitting there holding her water glass, that nearly 3 whole years had passed without a single thought of him. Not intentionally, simply because her mind had been filled with other things. That, she told Roman later, Feels, was the part she never saw coming. Feels. It wasn't forgiveness, it was forgetting. The idea that he could become, after enough time and enough life lived on her own terms, not some wound that had finally scarred over, Feels, but just a landmark she had passed so many times on her daily walk that she had simply ceased to notice it was there. And so, a long time after all this, more years than really make sense to count, Vivian found herself on the porch of that house on the cliff, Feels, a cup of coffee in her hand and a book in her lap she wasn't reading. Roman had passed the year before. There was no drama to it. He simply went to bed one night, had a bad morning, and was in a hospital by noon. By the evening of the next day, Feels, he wasn't in the hospital anymore. The funeral was small. Everyone who was supposed to be there was there, Feels. And in the months that followed, the feeling she felt most acutely was a very particular silence. It was the kind of quiet that fills a house when a large, noisy machine that was always running in the other room has finally been switched off. Feels. She missed him. It was not a complicated thought. She just missed him, but she was okay. She sat there on the porch. The ocean did what the ocean always does. She thought of the night she fled the Briarcliff house with just one suitcase, Feels, and the morning in Teresa's kitchen with the sound of scissors snipping behind her head, and the dentist's office in that little boardwalk town, and that cold February night in Abrielle's office over the hat factory, Feels, with a man standing on the other side of a desk. She thought of the ballroom, the red dress, and Roman's hand on the small of her back, Feels. She thought about that Saturday afternoon in their kitchen when he told her about Elena, and the payphone call from a motel parking lot after he had finally told Adriana Rosales the truth. And the morning she woke up, came downstairs, Feels, and realized she was finally completely done being angry. She was an old woman now. Her mother was long gone. Teresa gone nearly as long. Abrielle was, somehow, still alive, living in a retirement home she complained about endlessly over the phone, Feels. Sophia was gone, and Marisol. Marisol of the kitchen, Marisol of the suitcase, Marisol who promised her, "You are going to be so okay that one day he is going to wake up in a cold sweat because of how okay you are." Marisol lived well into her 90s, Feels, passing away in a bed that Vivian had paid for, with Vivian holding her hand as she left, Feels. And that, Vivian considered, was one of the deepest privileges her life had ever offered her. She sat there, the coffee now cold in her hands, and wondered what she might say. What words could she possibly offer the 23-year-old girl in Queensgate, Feels, the one who married a boy with a loud laugh and a charming smile she didn't truly understand? Or the 34-year-old woman, a vision in a champagne gown standing on the grand staircase, Feels? Or that hollowed-out stranger gripping a pair of scissors in Teresa's kitchen? She let the question sit for a long, quiet moment. There wasn't some perfect, tidy answer. She knew that now. But if she had to tell that girl, any of them, Feels, at any age, just one thing, it would be this. The cruelest thing someone can do isn't just to cast you aside. The real damage, the thing that poisons you, is when they first convince you that being thrown away is all you were ever good for, Feels. That is the war you actually have to win. It's not the glittering ballroom, or the final cutting words, or the sight of a packed suitcase by the door. No. The real battle is against the voice they installed in your head over the years. Feels. The one whispering that this, right here, was your limit. The hard work for the rest of your days, if you're one of the lucky ones, is prying that voice out. Sometimes it happens on an airplane high above the Atlantic. Other times it happens in a small kitchen. Feels. The sounds of a laundromat humming below. Or maybe in a dusty office in an old hat factory, when a person who is neither a saint nor a sinner looks you in the eye and says, I don't give a damn who you used to be. I want to know who you are right now. Feels. It can take years. Hell, it can take all of them. But you claw it out piece by agonizing piece, by living, by doing the work, by falling on your face, and by finally picking people who are brave enough to be seen and brave enough to see you. Feels. And then one day, you won't even notice it happening, but it will be gone. And the silence it leaves behind will not be an empty space. It will be yours. And the people who threw you away, they don't matter. Not because they weren't real. Oh, they were real. Feels. And they hurt you. You never have to pretend they didn't. But they are not, in the end, the story. You are. The suitcase is the story. The stranger's kitchen is the story. The scissors are the story. That cold office is the story. Feels. The man who was not good and was not bad, who loved you all the same and let you teach him the things he could never learn on his own. He is the story. The years that came after are the story. Feels. The mornings on this porch with the coffee and the book you aren't reading are the story. You are the story. She drank the last of the cold coffee. She set the cup down on the table. Feels. The breeze coming off the water stirred her hair. It was short and white now, the same way it had been short and dark a lifetime ago. From inside the house, the telephone began to ring. It would be one of the young women from the firm, she figured. Feels. Calling with a question that could have easily waited for Monday. Except this young woman never let anything wait, which is precisely why Vivian loved her for it, and why her will was leaving the young woman a considerable amount of money. Feels. She rose from the chair slowly. Her knee was not what it used to be. Feels. She walked inside to answer the phone. Behind her, the porch sat empty in the late afternoon sun, and the water below the cliff continued doing the same thing it had been doing long before any of them had ever arrived. Feels. And the same thing it would continue to do long after they were all gone. Somewhere inside, a woman who had once fled a ballroom in a champagne-colored dress with nothing but a single suitcase, lifted a telephone in a house that was hers and said, Feels, in a voice that was hers, Hello, this is Vivian, and that was the end of it.